Hey guys, tonight we step softly into a cool corridor of time where lamp flames tremble along pale stone and the air smells like warm olive smoke and a hint of sea salt drifting in from somewhere you can't see. The lamp makes a small sun on your desk while the rest of the room settled into cool shadows. A tiny fan hums like a friendly cricket and pushes a ribbon of air across your forearms so the parchment doesn't cling. Out in the corridor, a distant bell gives one polite note, then thinks better of continuing. Quills whisper from somewhere, scratch, lift, breathe as if the walls themselves are taking dictation. We are not actually sneaking through medieval bedchambers' wrong shoes, wrong century, and you probably wouldn't survive the drafty hallways without a cloak and a very tolerant guard. But we are going to stroll the edges of some royal reputations, the ones that grew wild in chronicles and court gossip, and see how they sound when read at a sleepy pace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what your local time is. I love picturing that this little midnight library is spread all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rest a fingertip on the corner of a map that isn't really a map, more like a tidy sheet where you've written 3 columns: rumor, record, reason. Candlelight warms the edge so the vellum releases a faint milk-sweet smell. The way old books exhale when the room turns kind, the fan, doing its best impression of an obedient breeze, keeps your wrist cool as your eyes drift along notes that promise kings with late-night corridors and poets with long memories. The bell from the hall does not ring again, excellent boundaries, and your breath falls into the meter the room suggests in, out, as steady as quills making agreeable scratches. A steady fact sits down in the lamplight with its shoes neatly aligned in the Middle Ages. Monarchs didn't live alone with their thoughts. Courts were crowded, staffed, and noisy. And what a king did in private rarely stayed private because households ran on service, rumor, and writing. Clerks wrote year-by-year chronicles. Ambassadors filed reports padded with gossip. Bishops kept letters. Poets tested metaphors on real people. If you've ever had a secret in a small town, imagine that town wearing silk and carrying 6 different languages and 24 candles privacy by mood lighting, not design. Your map of reputation weather is already busy, even before a name lands on it. You slide a note under the clip marked corridors and listen again to the room, the fans hush, the quills scratch, the bell's single syllable hanging in memory like a bookmark. That single note will come back. You promise yourself, in royal stories, attendance is always taken by someone chamberlains, confessors, stable boys, or the poet who swore he only wrote about gardens. For your first soft joke, you imagine a medieval phone app called Chaperone. It alerts whenever 2 courtiers stand under the same tapestry for more than 90 seconds, and then politely suggests a hymn. 5 stars for moral support, battery life questionable. You touch the air, a whisper above the parchment, not touching. Only promising, and jot a reminder that perverted is a modern label with pointy elbows. Here, you prefer scandal-prone reputations. because most of what survives is performance and paperwork. Historians still argue whether the sauciest stories about certain rulers reflect what actually happened or what opponents wanted you to remember. Was the door truly creaking at midnight? Or did a friar with a grudge decide it creaked in prose? They also wonder how much courtly love the poetry of noble longing shaped behavior versus just dressing halls in velvet words. The fan approves by continuing to hum with exemplary neutrality. Another steady fact nudges your elbow. Royal marriages were contracts with cathedrals, attached alliances arranged within canon law, dowries written like ship manifests, heirs expected like sunrise. That doesn't stop anyone from being complicated. It just means the official story always has clean shoes. You sip room temperature water history's most responsible beverage and let the iceless calm of it match the page. For your second soft joke, you picture a royal HR department titled Office of Hearts and Wardrobes, specializing in discreet door scheduling and emergency tapestry maintenance. Benefits include early access to rumors you will absolutely not repeat. A less attested anecdote circles the candle like a moth with a PhD. You once read a marginal note claiming a certain queen ordered iron belts for chastity across her realm. Dramatic, memorable, and almost certainly a later fantasy. Historians treat widespread medieval chastity belts as a myth, a Victorian fever dream rather than a 12th century toolkit. Still, the idea lands on your desk now and then, flaps once, and must be filed under comforting nonsense people enjoy telling at parties. You tuck it gently into the rumor column and nod to the fan for keeping a straight face. The bell note you heard earlier drifts back as memory, and you pencil it into your map legend. One ring means we're being counted. More than one means drama. No rings means either peace or someone misplaced the clapper. So many royal stories hinge on who heard what. When a chamberlain swearing he saw a lamp, a poet swearing he saw the moon, a monk swearing he saw nothing and would like dessert. Historians still argue whether specific midnight tales assignations, disguises, trapdoors were literary set pieces applied like stickers to unfashionable rulers, or whether household routines simply produced more witnesses than modern people can imagine. Medieval housing open plan, high traffic, low secrecy. You add a fingertip smudge to the corner where it says Byzantium after Vespers, a reminder that not all courts ran on the same clock. In some palaces, the night was social feasts ran long. Musicians cooled rooms with strings. Decisions arrived when the hall had exhaled its heat. In others, fasts and early prayers made mattresses persuasive before moonrise. A mainstream fact helps the map churches set the weekly rhythm feast days, fast days, vigil nights, and the justice calendar could take its cues from liturgical time. Your fan keeps its own liturgy hum on, hum off, never hum again. Outside your open window, someone passes with boots that know how to land muffled. The sound rides up the stair like a rumor on good leather. You put a neat dot next to witness types squires, clerks, laundresses, minstrels, cooks, and notice how every job is a kind of notebook. For your third soft joke, you imagine the laundry ledger annotated with tiny stars, stains, explanations, pending a very domestic archive. The quill from the next room gives a little flourish as if to sign off on the joke. A small draft from the corridor slips under the door, and turns the flame to a tongue. The fan counters with its steady hush. The lamp sighs and keeps behaving. On your page, you draw 3 faint circles to stand for 3 palaces. We'll visit later, stone that keeps cool memories, timbered halls that applaud themselves, a riverside fortress that pretends it cannot hear boats. You don't name them yet. You let the circles sit like moon phases, more mood than map. Historians still argue whether certain kings were unusually indulgent by any century's standards, or simply unlucky to be ruled by the pens of enemies. Some rulers attracted biographers with spicy palettes. Others inspired saintly colorists who painted flaws as shadows to make the halos shine. To keep yourself honest, you slide a second parchment from under the first, the canon and custom sheet. Here you've jotted the scaffolding that held behavior up, or pushed it back, confessor visits, penances, court statutes, handbooks for household officers, sermons about rulers as fathers, and a note that says sumptuary laws, clothes, talk. A steady fact again, church courts and secular courts both had skin in the game. Bishops could scold, parliaments could fine, queens could negotiate, chroniclers could immortalize. It's hard to be subtle when everyone is a part-time archivist. Another fringe story peaks in this one about a king who supposedly installed trapdoors beneath guest chairs for practical jokes that turned into scandals. It's the kind of tale that thrives because it satisfies both slapstick and moral justice, which makes it adorable and suspicious all at once. You write less attested beside it and let the fan blow the ink dry. You imagine the bell ringing twice if the floor suddenly opened, and smile because the single note you heard earlier was much more civilized. You look at your 3 columns rumor, record, reason, and draw a soft line down to a final word tone. The way you'll walk these rooms tonight is with tone that matches the fan's steady, kind, a little amused. We'll keep the door cracked, listen for quills, and let the lamp decide which details deserve warmth. We won't throw elbows. We won't gossip for sport. We'll let the records speak in indoor voices and tell us when to side-eye them. Historians still argue whether some reputations can ever be disentangled from the theater that built them. You decide to be a good usher, point to the seats, hand out programs, and make sure nobody kicks a footstool on the way out. Your palm hovers above the parchment one last time, not touching, only promising, and the page answers with a tiny, invisible coolness, like a cat agreeing to be in the same room with you. The bell does not ring again. The quill quiets. The fan keeps the room's slow heartbeat. You fold your map along a friendly crease and tuck it into the sleeve of the night where your notes prefer to travel. On the windowsill, the candle widens its base as if it too wants to sit down. When you stand, the chair offers a respectful hush. The corridor drafts you into a slower walk. The stair counts you with soft steps. The building holds the temperature of a library. Somewhere a door latch decides to be a star and clicks once. Somewhere else a page turns and then lies down. You move through the dark like a footnote, pacing itself, present, polite, small, and quietly necessary. Ahead lies a corridor that smells of wax and wine, where rushes press their green ghosts into the floor, and the lock's secret learns to sound like fabric. Your hand finds the banister cool, patient, and you breathe in the way the fan taught you earlier. By the time you reach the landing, The bell in your memory has counted you, and the night itself is ready to let a story open a door. Rushes press their green ghosts into the floor as you move along the corridor, and the air smells of beeswax, cool stone, and the wine someone stopped perfecting an hour ago. Torches flutter as if they are trading gossip. A tapestry stirs just enough to prove there is a door behind it. The single bell you heard earlier rings again in memory attendance. Not alarm, and your chest keeps that steady pace. The fan taught you in the lamplit room. Shh. A latch makes the faintest click, almost fabric, and the sound files itself beside your other polite percussion's pipe clunk. Orlock thock, Gates monk vowel. You slide a curtain tie into your signature knot, over, under, through, so it won't misbehave and announce you to the entire household. The cord hums approval small enough to stay between you and the stone. The floorboards here don't creak. Stone does not believe in squeaks, which is one of the corridor's favorite features. What does sound is the whisper of attendants asleep, where work finds them. Cloaks folded under cheek, boots neatly paired to please a future self. Candle ends in iron claws tremble as you pass. A greyhound on a cushion opens one eye and decides your furniture. You have your diploma in not touching fragile things at the ready, which tonight includes silk, rumor, and door handles you didn't open. Your rumor record. Reason map rustles from the sleeve of your mind tonight. The first column is crowded. A steady fact steps forward with tidy shoes. King John of England rules from 1199 to 1216. He loses Normandy, quarrels with barons, tangles with Pope Innocent III, hard enough to meet an interdict, and stands on a meadow at Runnymede in 1215 to seal Magna Carta, a document that sat down on royal habits like a very polite but very heavy cat. This, the record says with clean hands. The corridor says other things in a lower voice because households run on breath and fabric as much as they run on law. Here is a door with the latch worn smooth by gloves and night. A tapestry of hunting stags lifts at its hem as the passage breathes. Somewhere a page literal, the humankind waits to be useful, and somewhere a clerk tries to look less awake than he is. John's reputation arrives like a draft not subtle, everywhere at once. Chroniclers hostile to him wrote that he had a talent for unwelcome attentions, that corridors turned to private galleries when the hour grew tired, that consent often lacked witnesses. The language in their ink is sharp. Your job tonight is to listen and then set it back down without letting it cut. For your first soft joke, you imagine a castle feature called Quiet Mode, where hinges purr and door bars come with a courteous, "Are you sure?" prompt. 5 stars for everyone's blood pressure. You also imagine the chaperone app from the desk downstairs, which would definitely send push notifications on its own if tapestries swayed longer than a hymn. Somewhere a guard coughs once the official punctuation of corridors, and the sound behaves like a period. You slide your palm through air near the hanging, not to touch, only to promise and glance into a small presence chamber where rushlights end in patient puddles of wax. On a coffer sits a folded letter with a broken seal. The wax smells faintly of resin and iron, your harbor teaspoon. In the corner, a tray of chessmen waits as if a strategy might resume when the room remembers its day job. Your feet make fewer syllables on the rushes than your thoughts do in your rib cage. Historians still argue whether John's sordid reputation with women is a record of habit or a portrait sharpened by enemies' monkish pens like Roger of Wendover and Matthew Paris, who disliked his politics and his taxes even before they disliked his corridors. They also debate details in the most famous story, the rebel Baron Robert Fitzwalter's daughter, Matilda or Maud, who, in one telling, refused John's advances and fled to a convent, where a poisoned egg found her. In other versions, she survives. In the still others, the whole tale is a moral carnival ride strapped to the real machinery of baronial revolt. You hold the story with tongs and set it on the less attested shelf where it belongs. Not because refusal and danger are impossible in a court like this, but because later hands loved this narrative as if it came with a free sermon. A fringe whisper adds an after-dinner mint, a later rhyme links that Matilda to Maid Marian in the Greenwood, which is a charming upgrade package for anyone fleeing a king, but one that historians treat as literary embroidery rather than genealogy. You file it next to the party myth of universal chastity belts, also charming, also catalogued under No Thank You, Victorians, and Let the Corridor Exhale. The mainstream record is not shy about John's official bed. He sets aside his first wife, Isabella of Gloucester, on canon law grounds too closely related, and in 1200 marries Isabella of Angoulême, a teenager whose engagement to a powerful Poitevin had to be unsaid quickly. The match brings Angoulême into John's pocket and a permanent side-eye from French neighbors. You taste salt on the air, a channel rumor that rides up staircases surprisingly well. A jeweled clasp glints on a chair back and a moth thinks about it. Then chooses the candle with better manners. For your second soft joke, you imagine the Office of Hearts and Wardrobes downstairs printing a discreet poster. All corridors are shared spaces. Please schedule your drama. The poster also recommends appropriate footwear for emergency dignity. Someone should have warned half the Plantagenets. The Greyhound snores agreement without losing face. You pass a door left ajar as if it has an opinion. On the table beyond sits a dish of spiced pears, the room's one indulgence not yet escorted to bed. The pears release a ribbon of cinnamon, the same stubborn traveler who followed you through Sais and Gadir and the Shore Temple, and the scent belongs to no one and to every kitchen. A goblet shows teeth marks around its rim. You decide not to interpret, and your diploma in not touching glows gently like a night watchman's ember. Another steady fact brushes your sleeve. Chroniclers do record John's tendency toward pettiness, vindictiveness, and unpredictable temper, traits that bend the generous reading of any ambiguous rumor toward the shadowed side. He was excommunicated. He squeezed revenue from widows with unseemly bargaining. He took hostages and sometimes forgot mercy. By the time Magna Carta lay on the meadow, many hands were ready to believe the worst of any door that opened and shut in his vicinity. If you've ever watched a villain edit the lighting in a play just by walking on stage, you know the effect. Less attested but persistent are tales of John visiting nunneries with too much familiarity, of traveling with a portable theater of flirtations, of jokes at meals that tasted mean. The line between believable and beloved rumor is thin at midnight. You hear footsteps and know they are headed elsewhere because their rhythm is wrong for secrets. Your breath because it believes in order, keeps the room's simple meter, and refuses to sprint. For your third soft joke, you picture a monk inventing the medieval equivalent of a white noise machine. Abbey hum TM, drown out corridors with a soothing psalm in D minor and selling it to queens everywhere. 5 stars? No subscription. Free refills of sanctity. At the end of the passage, a window looks down into an inner ward where the moon sits in a bucket of water and pretends to be silver. A sentry's spear flashes once, rehearsing usefulness. A rope swings faintly where something was hauled up late and forgotten to be tidy. You retie the rope's loose end for the satisfaction of hearing the tiny monk vowl in the fibers. The knot purrs and the knight accepts your promotion to assistant keeper of peaceful details. The corridor narrows near John's privy chamber. Here the rushes have the musk of many evenings. A servant dozes on a stool, mouth in a small O, as dignified as sleepers can be when history is tiptoeing past. On a wall, a painted stag lifts its nose as if to register the weather of reputations. You let your hand hover, not touching an inch from the paint, and think of fresco dolphins you left unpetted, and of a stone ripples you read only with air, and of that pencil in the press room that refused to map morals like coasts. What does the record say softly when the corridor is patient? That not every door is a scandal, that not every king is reducible to midnight, that household routine is mostly linen, candles, lists, and yawns, that wives and queens ran their own economies of dignity, that ladies in waiting were not wallpaper, that chaplains kept schedules as well as souls, that even a king with a hungry reputation eventually had to sleep under a roof maintained by 100 hands that noticed everything and wrote many things down. You feel the map page in your head fold to a friendly crease. Rumor column loud tonight, vivid as cinnamon. Record column Magna Carta. Isabella twice over, a papal quarrel. A seething baronage, ships and taxes. Reason column a castle is a chorus. Hostile pens are loud, corridors produce witnesses. Bias shapes candles. Your bell rings once in memory and retires. You turn back toward the stair the way a tide ledger turns to the next neat line. Behind you, the tapestry lowers itself with the shyness of heavy fabric. The greyhound opens the other eye and closes it with twice the authority. The pears grow cooler by a degree your cheekbones can measure. The torch above the stair whispers, like a quill finishing a sentence. You put 2 fingers on the rail not to push, only to promise, and the wood forgets you in precisely the way you admire. When you step into the courtyard, the night lets go of your shoulders one measured notch. The air tastes of iron honest castle air and a hint of wet leather. Somewhere, a clerk smothers a yawn with his sleeve and adds a line to a letter the king retired late. That little word late will feed people for centuries. You let it pass without swallowing it whole. Your breath keeps the simple meter. A watch bell somewhere farther along the wall gives one proper syllable and stops. Attendance, yes. Drama, postponed. You walk on under a sky that has the decency to keep its stars where they belong. Ahead waits firelight on velvet sleeves and an argument conducted by glances sharper than daggers, favorites, songs, and a hearth that thinks highly of itself. You are not here to judge corridors. You're here to let the walls tell you how loud they were and to move on when the stone has said enough. Your knot sits obedient in the cord. The floor holds steady. The door remembers how to be a door. You move toward the next room with the quiet of a proofreader, turning a page present, small, ready to underline only what the sentence can bear. Firelight veils the rafters in orange, and velvet sleeves whisper when courtiers pass close to the hearth, as if warming their words before speaking. A lute tries a thin string and then settles down, the sound slipping along the tapestries like a cat under a bench. The rushes on the floor smell faintly of rosemary and smoke. Ink dries on a table by the wall with that metallic breath you've learned to taste in honest rooms. Somewhere beyond the next door, a bell gives one courteous syllable attendance and stops, as if to say it won't be judging any glances tonight. Your chest keeps the soft meter from the lamplit desk and the corridor shh. And your diploma in not touching fragile things moves from silk to rumor without a seam showing. You wait at the edge of a circle of light where faces keep their indoor voices, but eyes are doing the heavy lifting. A chair scrapes in a well-bred way, and the mood of the room pivots toward the young man by the fire. Piers Gaveston wears his confidence like an extra jewel. He has the relaxed attention of someone who has been told too often that he improves furniture by sitting near it. Edward, your king, whose crown is barely comfortable, yet leans as if warmth were a person and the person were speaking just to him. Here, the household breathes through ribbons and fur, but the politics are made of knives with lace handles. A steady fact stands up in all this softness and keeps its shoes clean. Edward II becomes king in 1307. His close companionship with Piers Gaveston alarms high lords almost immediately. The ordinances of 1311 attempt to curb royal power and exile the favorite. Gaveston returns, is seized by enemies, and is executed in 1312 near Blacklow Hill. 2 years later, the king meets disaster at Bannockburn, 1314, against Robert Bruce. In the 1320s, another favorite, Hugh Despenser the Younger, rises to a grim prominence that shreds baronial patience. And in 1326-27, Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer return from France with an army, topple the Despensers, and force Edward's abdication in favor of his son. This is the official hallway of events with good lighting and a plaque. It does not show how crowded the corridor feels when favorites rearrange footsteps and everyone learns to measure their whispers. You slide a glance along the edges of the hearth and see the economy of favors at work. Heads lean. Greetings detour. A cup travels by the long route to prove affiliation. For your first soft joke, you picture the chaperone app from earlier trying to keep up ping, ping, ping before deciding to go on a silent retreat. 5 stars for recognizing its limits. A greyhound stretched near the settle blinks, once as if timing alliances is beneath it, which is a fair policy. Historians still argue whether Edward's attachment to Gaveston should be described in terms of passionate friendship within courtly culture, a romantic bond, or a relationship that subverted expected hierarchies in ways more political than amorous. They also argue how much the baronial fury came from morals versus money and access. Was Gaveston dangerous because of kisses, or because he handed out offices like party favors and made jokes barons didn't forgive? The sources have that corridor tone you're learning to hear, part record, part rumor, always more witnesses than privacy, the lute resumes, and the fire throws a reel of light up the chimney like a scribe sending smoke signals to a chronicler outdoors. A servant passes with spiced wine, and the aroma carries a fine ribbon of cinnamon you do not blame on any person in particular. It has followed you across centuries like a traveler with a good passport. Your signature knot secures the curtain tie again, over, under, through, so the fabric won't announce your patience prematurely. The cord hums a monk vowel so small your ribs are its only audience. A less attested anecdote settles next to the log basket, as if it belonged later storytellers eager to paint Edward as unserious in the crafts of kingship. Loved to say he preferred rowing with watermen, thatching roofs, digging ditches, and spending time among low-born friends who spoke plainly and ate plainly. Charming, debated. There are hints of his fondness for rustic company in some accounts, but the catalogue of hobbies grew ornate as enemies sharpened their pens. Still, when a kitchen boy goes by with a pail and the king's eyes follow the boy's ease rather than the earl's opinion, you understand how such tales take root and keep their tidy boots near the fire. You drift past the chess table pieces set in the middle of a serious argument. They will finish later, and the board smells of wax and hands. On a stool, a folded writ waits. The wax on its seal is iron bitter and clean, a little teaspoon of the harbor taste that attends decisions. For your second soft joke, you imagine a royal workplace memo titled Favorites, a User's Guide, with bullet points like do not let them name their own job, rotate hobbies, and avoid jokes at Baron's expense. 5 stars, practical, not widely adopted, a mainstream stone in the river after Gaveston's death. Grief does not cure the pattern. The dispensers, Hugh the Elder and Hugh the Younger, arrive as tidal forces, the younger burrowing into royal trust, the pair pulling lands toward themselves as if England were a cloak they could tailor without fitting anyone else. Queen Isabella French, princess with a steel under silk, finds her influence narrowed to a corridor that should have been wider by vows and treaties. Later, she will step out of the corridor altogether, crossing to France, forging alliances, and returning with a political weather system attached. Historians still argue whether Isabella's decision to invade was primarily an answer to the dispenser's hoarding of power and humiliation of the queen, a defense of her son's inheritance, a personal repercussion finally leveled, or, like most earthquakes, the result of too many plates grinding for too long. They also argue whether Edward was uniquely ill-suited to the sharp end of baronial politics or simply unlucky to reign, while Scotland learned its best moves and English magnates learned their worst. In the Heart a Circle, a joke collapses with too much laughter ricochets, tightens shoulders. Piers is not here now. In this later year you're strolling, but the edges of his old presence are stitched into the carpet. People still stand where they learn to stand, and the invisible seating chart lingers like the smell of yesterday's spices. You think of your rumor, record reason page, folded along a friendly crease, and feel the word tone write itself across your palm again. Lovely, not a coastline. A guard passes the doorway with a measured step and a spear point that makes a tiny star whenever it finds firelight. The bell outside tries one polite syllable, and retires. Your breath follows shh, and the hall goes on performing the illusion that eyes do not talk. A servant replenishes the fire. Sparks make a quiet festival of themselves and then stay within their parish. You're grateful for obedient sparks. Another less attested story brushes your sleeve, the famous, gruesome rumor about Edward's death in Berkeley Castle, involving an instrument no bedtime needs named. You let it hover at a distance and label it with care later. Hostile chroniclers delivered that scene with theatrical relish. Modern historians doubt it strongly, suspecting a narrative designed for maximum humiliation rather than reliable reporting. The mainstream consensus is sober. Edward dies in captivity in 1327. The manner is unclear. The politics around the news are loud with motives. You put the cruel anecdote on the same shelf where you placed the chastity belt myth and the trapdoor chairs popular, sticky, not to be fed after midnight. The room shifts into a quieter key. The king, who has been staring past the people who increasingly call the weather, stands and goes toward a window. Outside, the night is cool enough to behave like a basin where the moon rinses itself. He touches the stone lightly, not to push, only to promise, and for a blink, he is only a person who likes the feel of air on his face, which is the sort of detail that refuses to fix politics but makes the room kind. A clerk slides in with papers that need signatures. The ink is iron-rich. The pen scratches a line that sounds like rain choosing roof over soil. The clerk bows with a stamina that would be useful in storms. For your third soft joke, you imagine a new office downstairs, department of reasonable favorites, where applicants must prove they can say no to gifts, yes to budgets, and maybe to chess. The greyhound yawns as if to say the department will never be staffed. Correct, yet we dream. Your signature knot gets work again when a curtain threatens to meddle with a candle. Over, under, through the rope purrs its small vowel. Your sternum answers. The flame stays well behaved. A cup of warm spiced wine arrives at your elbow the way civility does when someone has decided not to make a scene. You leave the cup for the person whose night is actually running. Your job is to watch the edges and keep them from fraying. Historians still argue whether Edward's softness for craft and company rowing, thatching, being where linen and wood are honest, actually made him a worse king, or merely a different kind of one in a century that wanted a type it could predict. They also argue how many of the sharper adjectives attached to him were sharpened specifically to cut in contrast to Edward I, the hammer of the Scots, and Edward III, who will hammer France as if contracts were nails. Between hammers, a man with a fondness for lutes and low benches looks worse in the record than he might have sounded in a kinder song. The fire settles into a red grammar, the hall exhales, somewhere a door closes with the tenderness of a drawer that stops just shy of a click. You feel the bell you've been carrying in your ribs ring once and then rest. The rush is cool by a degree your cheekbones can measure. A page counts the chessmen and leaves them in mid-argument for tomorrow. The greyhound decides the entire century can proceed without its input and sleeps. You step back into a passage where a stone prefers a silence and where your feet remember how to keep time with older floors. The air tastes of iron and Rosemary Castle honest and a faint citrus, someone smuggled in from a hall that liked to be cosmopolitan. You put 2 fingers on a door frame not to push, only to promise, and the oak forgets your heat immediately. In the yard, a groom leads a horse that knows how to be a roomer without effort. Ahead waits a room lacquered in mosaic light, where silk shoes slip on marble cool as patient water. A city of gold glass and oil lamps will practice twilight with a man whose love of the spectacle and cruelty have earned him centuries of late-night footnotes. You let the hearth behind you go about its business, and you walk toward the door that opens onto Byzantium's version of a corridor, one with domes listening. Your breath keeps steady time. The way fans, gates, and ropes have been teaching you all along. The bell doesn't ring because it trusts you to arrive where you mean to. And the night approves this arrangement by becoming slightly easier to wear. Mist slips off the Seine and beads along the parapet like a rosary that forgot its prayers, and you lean on the stone not to push, only to promise and feel how it keeps the rivers cool, even with lanterns quivering overhead. The water smells of wet rope, iron pins, and last hour's bread. A barge nudges the quay with a soft clunk that files itself neatly next to Orlok thocks. Gate hums, and the one careful bell you keep hearing from other nights. Your chest keeps the harbor meter while torches along the Louvre's outer wall breathe in orange and let it go. The tower across the way, Nesla, wears its darkness like a hood, and the wind does its quietest work, lifting a corner of the city's secrets without actually opening them. Rushlight from a watchman's horn window spills a warm teardrop on the stone, and somewhere a page's shoes choose to be polite. You practice your diploma in not touching fragile things by keeping your fingers away from the damp mortar that begs to be traced. You let your signature knot tie a loose loop in your own scarf over, under, through, so it doesn't flap a rumor into a night. The scarf hums the small monk vowel your ribs understand, and the river answers with its oldest indoor voice. A steady fact walks out of the mist, with boots it believes in 1314. The French court convulses around what later readers call the Tour de Nesle affair. 3 princesses, Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy and Jean of Burgundy, the wives of King Philip IV's sons, are accused of adultery with 2 Norman brothers, Philippe and Gauthier d'Aunay de Aunay. Chroniclers say the discovery begins with Queen Isabella of England. Philip's daughter, who notices something amiss during a visit, embroidered purses or tokens she had given to her brothers, seemed to have migrated to men who were not her brothers. The alarm travels fast. The Aunay brothers are arrested, tortured into confession, and publicly executed. Marguerite and Blanche are imprisoned at Chateau Gaillard, and Jean is tried and eventually restored to favor. The record keeps a straight face, the river keeps mist, the tower keeps its name a little longer than it keeps its innocence. For your first soft joke, you picture the chaperone app from earlier trying to do urban coverage, Sencam. Bridge watch, purse alert, before deciding it cannot compete with a queen who notices everything. 5 stars for honesty, recommended update, trust Isabella. A gull cruising the current approves by refusing to improvise. Torchlight slicks the tower wall into soft gold. A boatman coughs once, the punctuation that tells the river he is present, but does not wish to audition. Historians still argue whether Isabella truly solved the mystery by spotting her gifts in the wrong hands, or whether that's a story arranged later by pens that love good stagecraft. They also debate how much of the case was state theater politics bending a scandal into shape, and how much was what it says on the parchment. What no one argues is that the consequences were heavy. Marguerite will die in captivity in 1315. Blanche's marriage to Charles will tangle in law and separation. Jean will weather the storm and return to court. The dynasty, pressed at the hinge, will creak. You pass a baker's doorway where warm air breaks the damp, and a drift of cinnamon yes still traveling threads the alley like a rumor with excellent shoes. A less attested Paris whisper brushes your sleeve on fog certain nights. People said one could hear delicate laughter from the tower's stone like bracelets loosening, and then a single bell, no more, as if attendants were taken by someone the river preferred not to name. Charming, unverified. You place it on your shelf beside Plaza bells underwater, the lamp in say that drafts cannot persuade, the cave that rings to swell, and the printer's ornamental O with its secret harbor. The Seine, obliging, gives one tiny lick against the key and retires. On the Pont Neuf, newer now, older later, a seller of trinkets lays out ribbon purses in a tidy row. You hover your hand above the embroidered mouths not touching, and imagine Isabella's eye, a hawk for patterns. For your second soft joke, you invent a royal lost and found kiosk where a clerk labeled Office of Hearts and Wardrobes answers queries like, has anyone turned in a purse? It should not be in Normandy, and stamps receipts with enormous discretion. 5 stars, limited hours, impossible line. Another steady fact steps out of the records with paperwork. The brothers' confessions were extracted under torture, which tells you as much about procedure as about truth. The princess's fates were decided within the tight architecture of Capetian dignity and canon law, and the Paris of Philip IV, the Iron King, ran on accountants, lawyers, and the kind of clerks who wrote down everything except the shape of a breath between 2 sentences. If you have ever listened to silence with a scribe in the room, you know it hums like a gate at low tide. Historians still argue whether the severity of the punishments came mostly from the insult to royal blood or from the timing. 1314 is a year of endings. Philip IV will die before it closes. His 3 sons, Louis the Coche, Philip V, Charles IV, will reign in quick succession, leaving no surviving sons of their own, and the line will slide into succession crises that give textbooks headlines. Some writers, centuries later, will yoke the scandal to another event of that spring, the burning of the last Templar leaders on an island in the Seine, where Jacques de Molay is said to have called down a curse on Philip and the Pope. That linkage, romantic, dramatic, belongs to the less attested shelf. Nevertheless, you feel how a stories like to share scaffolding when they can borrow each other's lighting. You pause where the tower's base meets the quay. The stones are slick and honest. The air smells of rope tar and felt hats. The torch nearest you feels the river in its flame. The night has the good manners to keep its volume low. A clerk passes with papers under his cloak ink breath. Iron taste, and you think of every page that will help this scandal survive the judicial record. The Chronicle Digest, the letters with their fixed politeness, the sermons using the event as a caution, the poems that will change names and keep the plot because rhyme eats tidiness for supper. A less attested later flourish arrives wearing theater makeup in the 19th century, a play by Dumas and collaborators, Latour, Denezel, will put a queen in the title role and embroider the legend with moonlight and appetite, folding centuries into one stage night for love of spectacle. Charming, influential, and absolutely not minutes of any real meeting. You set it beside the trapdoor chair myth and the chastity belt fantasy, and let the river provide the applause it deserves, a polite ripple, no more. For your third soft joke, you imagine Paris installing courtesy signs along the parapet. Please keep hands, hearts, and purses inside the marriage at all times, and a smaller sign under it that reads, historians still argue whether signs work. A cat on a window ledge reads both and chooses to yawn. You touch the air a breath above the stone again, not to push, only to promise and see how this night is built, like your map back at the desk. Rumor. Record, reason. Rumor swirls in mist. Record waits in a ledger with cold ink. Reason notes that queens notice things, that courts are crowded, that towers make good stages for stories because they hold shadows so efficiently. The bell that rang in your memory rings again, once in the mind only, and you file the note under attendance taken. A barge slides under the bridge with the grace of a drawer closing without a click. A watchman's spear tip makes a small star and then goes dark. A window somewhere sets down the lute you heard earlier in a different city, because instruments borrow each other's stamina. Your breath keeps the gentle meter hotch, and the cold climbs the stone one measured inch and stops, as if a courteous agreement has been reached between season and wall. Historians still argue whether Marguerite's death in captivity owed more to harsh conditions than to intentional neglect, whether Blanche's later life should be framed as penance or politics, and whether Jean's comeback says more about her case or about Burgundian leverage. They also argue whether the Honnet brothers were chosen because they were truly lovers, or because arresting great lords would have been inconvenient to too many budgets. In all of this, the tower keeps its outside face blank and lets pens carve the inside. You turn along the parapet toward a softer district where lamps turned street dust to honey, and the falconer's bell from a far court rings in your memory. The scene. The original chaperone watches you go with level eyes. On the curb, a purse seller ties a ribbon with exactly your knot. Over-under through. The cord purrs, the ribbon behaves. Cinnamon hides in the next block, waiting for bread. The city edits its breath into a sleep. At the key steps, you rest 2 fingers on the railing and find the same small warmth that wood gives before it forgets you, as benches and desks and press frames have done all week. The mist has decided to become air again. The tower has decided to be a silhouette instead of a rumor. Your shelf of maybes grows by one neat item labeled laughter in stone, unproven, useful to poems. Your ledger of facts keeps its heavy lines 13-14. Arrests, a queen's observation in some form, a court in upheaval, a dynasty heading for a tangle. Lovely, not a coastline. You drift away from the river toward a quarter where oil lamps bloom on gold glass and marble stays cool like patient water, where shoes whisper in Greek on floors that learn to obey emperors. There, a ruler in twilight will practice pageantry the way other men practice archery, and his appetites political, theatrical, unkind, will leave scratches on the empire's varnish. Your scarf sits obedient under your chin, your knot keeps its promise, your breath remains a quiet bell that rings once per line. The Seine releases your sleeve, the tower lets you pass, and Paris consents to go on, being a city that does not sleep so much as hold still until the next stanza. Oil lamps bloom on gold gloss, and the light behaves like warm honey thick, slow, obedient as you pass under a dome that turns footsteps into whispers. Silk shoes slip on marble cool as patient water. The stone returns the day's heat in polite sips and then forgets you. The way benches and rails taught you earlier, outside, the Bosporus breathes in a long sh and out a long sh, and the sea's faint iron, your traveling teaspoon, settles on your tongue. A tiny bell somewhere in the palace chapel tries one tender syllable attendance and retires, content that the night has been counted. You tie a curtain cord with your signature knot, over, under, through, so a draft won't make the silk gossip. The cord hums a monk vowel your ribs answer without thinking. Mosaics watch with saintly patience while courtiers pass in a spill of brocade, and the color of pomegranates makes the air taste red. You practice your diploma in not touching fragile things by keeping your hands a careful inch from glass that looks wet, though it has been dry for centuries. The lamps give you the kind of light that forgives everyone a little. The city has set itself to twilight Byzantium's favorite hour, when the empire pretends to be a candle and a mirror at once. A steady fact walks across the floor with deliberate steps. Andronikos, for Komnenos, grandson of Alexios. I takes the throne in 1183 after a career of charisma and flight, becomes emperor beside the young widow Agnes of France, promises reform against graft, and rules until 1185, when revolt brings him down and a new dynasty rises under Isaac II Angelus. That is the hallway version with good plaques and no drafts. The rooms along the hallway say other things at a lower volume about charm that rearranged seating, punishments that bit hard, and a palace that glowed even when its politics did not. You pause by a screen where shadows of peacocks from the garden lace themselves into the lattice. A servant passes with a sweet wine that smells faintly of cinnamon, of course it does, and a plate of sugared almonds that pretend to be moral philosophy in tiny coats. For your first soft joke, you imagine the palace maitre d' checking a list labeled seating friends, enemies, and complicated, and then penciling everyone into the last column because it keeps the peace. 5 stars for diplomacy, difficult to cater. Historians still argue whether Andronikos meant his anti-corruption campaign to be a genuine cleansing or a clever broom for sweeping rivals into the yard, and whether his early popularity, he walked the city like a candidate, was a stagecraft, conviction, or both. They also argue about his part in the anti-Latin violence of 1182, whether he lit it, rode it, or failed to stop it once it had a life of its own. The lamps refuse to decide. They have chosen to flatter cheekbones impartially. A less attested anecdote, step out of a side door wearing a smile that belongs to a storyteller before the crown. Andronikos supposedly escaped a difficult confinement by feigning illness and then slipping through a loosened grate. Another version says he disguised himself as a monk and vanished into the countryside with only a staff and a good memory for footpaths. Charming. Embroidered across sources. You place both on the maybe shelf with your drowned bells and the sais lamp, and the ornamental O with a private harbor. Still, when a breeze from the garden cools your wrist exactly once, you understand how stories grow a cloak of credibility from a small bodily mercies. Your feet find a gallery where marble lions keep their paws in order, and the floor cools another degree, the exact kindness your cheekbones can measure. The whisper of silk increases Agnes. The French princess, who came east as a child bride for Alexios II, is now a queen by the new emperor's side. Chronicle speak of a marriage to Andronikos when she is very young and he is not. You keep your voice like the lamps low, careful, honest. A mainstream fact sits down gently. Dynastic marriages cross ages and borders. Appearances at court do duty for treaties. Protections exist in law and custom. But power drafts its own exceptions. Historians still argue whether that marriage was ceremonial politics only or fully consummated. The chronicle voices are not unanimous, and whether Andronikos shaped his image as a romantic conqueror, or whether later pens lacquered him in that color to fold morality into the narrative. The debate moves like the Bosporus at the slack water, not urgent, persistent. You let it pass under the bridge of your attention without forcing anyone to jump. He had loved before and elsewhere. Theodora Komnene, the emperor's niece, is the name that returns with sea salt on it. They lived a while on the Black Sea's edges and far in the provinces, in a romance that traveled with children and urgent geography. The air in this corridor somehow remembers rope and saddle and the rough gentleness of going. You can feel why perverted kings is a phrase that sells pamphlets, and less so why complicated kings in complicated houses should be the thumbnail. You edit the thumbnail in your head into something sleep can hold. For your second soft joke, you imagine a palace notice board installed by your imaginary office of hearts and wardrobes courtyards or shared spaces. If you must fall in love, please coordinate with the scheduling clerk and the diplomatic corps. The clerk underneath has written in tiny Greek. Also, consider poetry. 5 stars. Improved hallway traffic. Mixed results. The reforming emperor, when he is in that mood, walks the city walls with a visible satisfaction, changes tax habits, demotes officials who grew rich at the wrong rate. The punishments are brisk, the fear is real, the praise is loud while it lasts. Your signature knot gets employment again when a window curtain tries to flirt with an oil lamp. Over under, through hush, and the small monk vowel stays inside the rope where it belongs. The chapel bell, remembering its duties, refuses to ring again. Once is perfect. A less attested court whisper slides into your ear politely. People said Andronikos dyed his beard to look younger in lamplight and practiced an actor's stillness before mirrors so that his entrance could do more work than his decrees. Charming, unprovable. You place it next to the king who loved thatching roofs. Anecdote from another court. A cousin in the family of stories that make rulers oddly tangible. The Mosaic saints insist on equal time and glow a little brighter to remind you who is paid up on eternity. Another steady fact arrives like a clerk with balanced accounts in 1185. The city chills against Andronikos. Revolts in Thrace blossom into danger. Isaac Angelos survives an arrest attempt and becomes the rallying flag. The emperor flees and is caught. His end is violent, no details tonight. Only the consensus that the capital writes his last line with a hard hand. Power, like tide, is smooth until it isn't. Palaces that teach lamps to flatter also teach marble how to stand while decisions stumble. Historians still argue whether the empire under Andronikos was rescuable by severity, doomed by geography and treasury alike, or torpedoed by a personal style that turned allies into accountants of injury. They also argue whether his brief rule should be remembered chiefly for reform, for cruelty, or for the theatricality that made both seem larger. The lions on the floor keep their paws tidy and do not vote. You drift toward a balcony where evening braids itself with the smell of jasmine and ship tar. The city murmurs in Greek, Armenian, Italian, Arabic the way a harbor speaks when it is also an archive. A small boat noses a fender below and gives that soft clunk you've been collecting from every obedient key. Your ribs register attendance and relax by one notch. For your third soft joke, you imagine a civic fragrance line, Eau de Chrysotriclinos, with notes of beeswax, pomegranate rind, and the faintest legalism, limited edition millimeter, which smells like brass compasses and the patience of surveyors who never get credit. Your palm hovers a breath above the carved balustrade, not touching, only promising, and the marble lends you its cool without needing to keep your heat. Agnes walks by with a retinue of shadows and lamps. The air around her smells like linen aired carefully and a foreign orchard kept alive in memory. You think about what anyone her age should not have to decide and let the lamps do what lamps do, make faces human and leave edges kindly undefined. Down in the court, a eunuch steward blows out one wick, then another, pulling darkness across the room like a well-folded cloak. Somewhere in the precinct, a reader chants a verse that climbs and then settles. So even the night remembers grammar. You put a thumb to your inner margin and write a pencil note no one will see lovely, not a coastline. It is how you keep stories in their lanes without declaring the sea off limits. You return through a hall where gold tesserae pretend to be dawn, and you feel how much this city loves theater liturgies, entrances, exits, the long choreography of power-changing partners. Andronikos is one dancer whose steps the floor still remembers, not because they were kind, but because the heel struck with rhythm. Your knot sits obedient on the curtain. The bell sleeps. The sea keeps its Outside the main gate, the night touches your face with the unperfumed hand of weather. Lamps along the sea walls put down coins of light and pick them up again. You breathe the harbor teaspoon and the smudge of cinnamon from some baker who works absurd hours, and you forgive the century for everything it cannot be to its own children. You let the room behind you keep its mosaics, its rumors, and its arguments. You carry forward the lamplight, the knot, the one bell, the iron taste, and a decision to let the record speak without the rumor shouting it down. Ahead, the air leans toward citrus and falcon bells, and the hush of a cloister where three languages practice manners together. A Hohenstaufen emperor will keep late hours under palm trees and file love lyrics between laws. You lower your hand from the balustrade, and the marble forgets you with masterful speed. The sea says again, the gate hums its low monk vowel, and the city allows you to leave like a footnote that has already done its job small, precise, and surprisingly necessary to the drift toward sleep. Citrus hangs over the cloister like small moons, and the night air wears orange blossom the way good parchment wears light. A falcon's bell ticks once attendance and falls quiet. Your chest matches it, while the sea below the bastions answers with a softer breath that smells of rope, salt, and the faint iron teaspoon you keep tasting in honest harbors. Oil lamps nurse their steady honey along arcades of pale stone. The marble keeps yesterday's heat in its memory and releases it politely, a degree at a time, then forgets you as benches and rails have been forgetting you all week. You tuck a loose vine back along the lattice with your signature knot, over, under, through, and the cord hums that small monk vowel your ribs have learned by heart. The knot, pleased with the scent of orange leaf, agrees to hold its peace. Palermo tonight is a low orchestra Arabic couplets braid with Latin murmurs. A Provençal rhyme borrows a cadence and gives it back in Italian before Italian knows it will be a language. A scribe carries a sheet that smells of cut reed and gall. A courtier carries a plate of sugared peel that throws one thin ribbon of cinnamon, the same traveling companion that showed up in Paris and Byzantium and somehow has a seat in every century's kitchen. You do your diploma in not touching fragile things by letting the sugared peel pass unharmed, and the plate, flattered, goes on to flatter someone else. Your steady fact steps with neat boots into the garden. Frederick II Hohenstaufen, born 1194, king of Sicily as a child, Holy Roman Emperor from 1220, keeps this island court as a workshop for the several worlds in his head. He founds the University of Naples in 1224. He writes about birds with a precision that would make any modern field guide stand up straighter, the arte venendi cum avibus. He crusades without charging a wall, negotiating Jerusalem by treaty in 1229 while excommunicated. He thus speaks multiple tongues, or at least enjoys being rumored to, and he uses law as architecture. Palermo, under him, is perfume and parchment at once. Historians still argue whether his famous court is best understood as a sincere experiment in convivencia languages and laws, in thick conversation, or as a strong monarch's convenience, with tolerance firmly under his thumb. They also argue whether the Muslim colony at Luqueira, his Saracen archers, and their families signals genuine pluralism, or a practical garrison with good craftsmen and better loyalty pay. The falcon's bell declines to arbitrate. It makes one small sound and resumes being metal with manners. A less attested anecdote perches on the fountain lip and tilts its head. A Franciscan chronicler later murmurs that the emperor wanted to discover the language children would speak. If no one ever spoke to them, he supposedly kept infants in silence to hear the natural tongue. Another rumor presents ghastlier experiments about digestion. You lift both with tongs and place them, carefully labeled hostile source. Unlikely, caution, on the same maybe shelf where you left chastity belts, trapdoor chairs, and overconfident stage plays. In this room, you prefer the emperor with ink on his fingers, hooding a bird with hands that understand patience. For your first soft joke, you invent a court app called hood mode toggle it, and all hawks and certain courtiers enter a temporary calm. Notifications are delivered by Falcon Bell only. 5 stars, reduces swoops in the hallway, pairs beautifully with your earlier chaperone app, which has learned to ignore birds and concentrate on people. A servant draws a curtain back, cool air flows around a manuscript leaf like water around a stone. The page glows with diagrams of wings in a hand that has held feathers, not just pens. Frederick's reputation for bodily appetites walks in the wake of those pages' wives by treaty. Constance of Aragon, Isabella of Jerusalem, and later Isabella of England, children, legitimate and otherwise, and Bianca Lancia, the great love at the far end of the corridor, perhaps married on her deathbed. The papacy's pens hot with quarrels and excommunications paint him as Epicurean, pagan, Antichrist adjacent, a man who liked life too much for Rome's comfort. Historians still argue whether Bianca was formally wed to Frederick at the last or remained mistress in the record despite ceremony in memory. They also argue how many of the emperor's sensual vices belong to papal rhetoric rather than to household routine. The safest consensus is that he was fully human in a court that encouraged humans to be interesting. The safest bedtime is to let the rhetoric take a seat and drink some water. You walk the peristyle where water talks like a clerk who respects boundaries, a steady, not loud. In an anteroom, a singer from the Sicilian school tries a new stanza, the kind that will set Italian lyric on its feet, clear vowels, a rhyme scheme that looks like a courtyard, sweetness disciplined by law. A notary takes down a land grant and dots it with an iron-rich period you can taste on your tongue like the sea. In the aviary, a handler's glove breathes leather and bird and the soft dust of exertion. Bells stitched to anklets mark the simple fact of motion. A less-attested menagerie boasts pads in with a soft pause visitors wrote of panthers, lions, dromedaries, and a giraffe that made even serious people gasp. Whether the giraffe set hoof in Palermo or just in someone's verba remains pleasingly unclear. What is clear is a taste for the marvelous that the still kept lists feed the schedules, and a man with a ledger shaped like a stable. You approve of the ledger. You remember the Say's shelf list. You add a tiny smile to your habit of indoor voices. For your second soft joke, you imagine the office of Hearts and Wardrobes opening a satellite desk labeled Birds and Bureaucracy, where the clerk speaks falcon, schedules malts around parliaments, and the stamps permits for poetry. Benefits include seed for doves and a stern memo about leaving hawks hooded during treaty negotiations. A mainstream stone underfoot, he is excommunicated more than once. He sails on crusade anyway. He crowns himself King of Jerusalem in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. He signs a 10-year truce with Al-Kamil. He comes home to more letters with seal cords that smell like resin and iron. He hunts with cheetahs and hawks. He orders laws that read like a ruler who wants every hinge to be known by name. He builds castles whose corners face the winds, as if geometry were a way of speaking to weather. Historians still argue whether Castel del Monte is a hunting lodge, a statement piece, a solar machine, or simply a ruler's strong preference for octagons. They also argue whether Friedrich's cruise to the east was a brilliant end run around Crusade theater, or a vanity project that left too many pages angry. The orange trees untroubled. Release another thin sweetness into the breeze as if to say, we have loved poets before and will again. Your hands respectful of books, fabrics, and rumors hover above a Sicilian canzone still drying on the page. It speaks of desire as if it were a well-governed city fountains running on time, windows opening when asked, streets that remember how to cool themselves at noon. You wonder how much of Frederick's reputation for indulgence is just this: a court that lets metaphors have chairs. A falcon rattles its jesses. The bell makes one clean syllable and retires. A less attested kitchen gossip arrives with a grin. Someone's aunt's letter insisted the emperor could tell the hour by smelling a flower at different times of day. Charming, unprovable, a perfect party trick for a room that likes applause. You file it beside your cinnamon traveler and the tide staff's millimeter precision. One is fantasy, one is fact. Both make rooms smile, and your job is to keep them on their correct shelves. For your third soft joke, you pitch a fragrance line to the court, eau de constitution notes of orange leaf, lamp smoke, leather glove, iron gall, limited edition millimeter, which, as ever, smells like brass compasses and measured patience. The treasurer wants a cut. The falcon does not care. The poet writes an ad in hendecasyllables and wins a date. You lean on the parapet not to push, only to promise and look down toward the harbor where a single bell strikes once, the way good harbors announce themselves to sleep. The moon drifts on the water like a page left open to negotiation, and the city edits its line in reflection. Your breath keeps time with the waves, and the marble under your fingers lets go of the day's warmth to meet you properly at night. Somewhere a clerk of the chancery folds a charter, wax breathes iron, a seal presses its little universe into cooling lake. Somewhere a young scholar closes his grammar and decides to write a love poem in Sicilian rather than Latin, and does not ask permission from anyone. Somewhere a falcon drops from the glove like a sentence ending in the right word. You remember the bell in Paris? The mosaics of Byzantium, the corridor that is smelled of rosemary and smoke, the rule of light on the Say's floor, the tide staff's numbers, the pressman's pencil that wrote moral, not topographic. You add one more pencil notation in the margin of your mind politics. Yes, perfume. Also, lovely, not a coastline. Historians still argue whether Frederick's end 1250 fever at Castel Fiorentino marks the close of a historical weather pattern or only a turn in a long season. They also argue whether his many lives lawgiver, hunter, scholar, lover can be stacked without someone's favorite sliding off the pile. The orange blossom does not weigh in, it just keeps the night civil. When you step away from the parapet, the knot you tied in the vine stays put, the bell stays quiet, and your shoulders let go of one measure of tension they had no need to keep. The cloister exhales. The lamps decide to be stars for a different story. The marble accepts footsteps without criticism. Down a street lined with late roses and saddle soap, the road leans toward another court, where resin, leather, and duty divide a hallway between a marriage and a great love. You slide 2 fingers along the carved doorframe lightly, as always, and are pleased again by how well the wood forgets you. Palermo folds its perfume back into itself, and the sea keeps breathing like a good metronome. while you walk toward Castile with a pocket full of bells that ring once and a knot that knows what enough feels like, resin, saddle leather, and late roses share the hallway, and the floor keeps a memory of hoofbeats the way parchment keeps a memory of warm hands. A groom's bridle squeaks once and goes virtuous. A brazier gives off juniper that smells faintly of pencils thinking about the forest. Somewhere in the Alcazar's chapel, a bell offers a single punctual syllable attendance and retires with perfect manners. Your chest answers, "Ugh." The metronome you adopted back at the lamp table and never had reason to return. You smooth a lazy curtain with your signature knot over, under, through so it won't gossip to drafts, and the cord hums a small monk vowel you could hide in your sleeve. The walls are cool by a degree your cheekbones can measure. Azulejo tiles hold little oceans that have chosen to be pictures tonight. The hallway ends in a T, and the air itself seems to divide. Left smells of beeswax and Portugal's patient linen. Right of orange leaves and a perfume that pretends not to know its own name. You have arrived at a domestic weather map. Duty keeps a door on the left. A private door breathes on the right. You do your diploma in not touching fragile things by not touching either. And the building appreciates your restraint by remaining architecture instead of theater. A steady fact walks in with clean boots, Alfonso X of Castile. Born 1311, becomes king at 1 year old, spends boyhood under guardians and factions, and assumes personal rule in 1325. He marries Maria of Portugal in 1328 for reasons that where crowns alliances border peace. And in those same years, his attention and loyalty settle powerfully on Leonor de Guzman, a noblewoman of Leon. He will win a great victory at the Rio Salado in 1340 with his father-in-law, Afonso IV of Portugal. Pushing back the Marinid invasion, he will found the Order of the Band to tidy chivalry. He will strengthen royal justice. He will die in 1350 of plague during the siege of Gibraltar. A king who brought the law to heel and never quite convinced his house to keep one schedule. The left door, Maria's, smells of ink, rosewater, and patience. The right, Leonor's, carries the warm trace of a room used as a headquarters and a cradle at once. Your map from the desk, with the 3 columns rumor, record, reason, slides up under your ribs and asks for careful handwriting. Historians still argue whether Alfonso's arrangement was an improvisation that became policy or a policy that wore improvisation's cloak. Did he keep 2 courts, queens and mistresses, because politics demanded 2 audiences, or because affection built its own bureaucracy and he ratified it? After the fact, they also argue whether he meant to move toward legitimizing Leonor's many sons in ways that would outpace Maria's single heir, the future Peter, or whether the balances were always more ad hoc than plot. A less attested corridor whisper arrives with doorknob self-confidence people, said a discreet postern connected the king's apartment to Leonor's rooms in one palace, a narrow passage lined with tapestries so the hinges would think they were birds. Charming, unproven, you shelve it next to your drowned bells, ever-burning lamps, and that printer's ornamental O with a secret harbor. Still, when a draft lifts the fringe of a hanging and sets it down without noise, you understand why passages are the favorite pets of rumor. You pass a table where a saddle rests like a folded argument, a stitching tar sweet, pommel warm from a recent ride, a thin ribbon of cinnamon dares to show itself from somewhere kitchen, chest, or memory, and refuses to apologize for having accompanied you from Paris and Palermo. For your first soft joke, you picture the palace steward issuing hall passes, left door royal accounting, right door royal accounting of a different kind. Please sign for keys. Also, no candles near curtains. 5 stars for honesty. Limited success. A mainstream stone in the stream with Leonore. Alfonso fathers a flock of children, 10 in most lists, including Enrique of Trastamara, who will one day decide he has more claim to Castile than his half-brother Peter thinks he does. A second household grows around Leonore with titles and towns stapled to it. Medina Sidonia, Trujillo, lands that smell of wheat and river fords. Courtiers learn to carry 2 calendars, 2 sets of compliments, 2 careful faces. The left door keeps the queenship, the right door keeps momentum. Historians still argue whether Leonore's power should be read as near co-rulership in the 1340s or as the leverage of grants that still depended on the king's heartbeat. Whether she practiced politics as talent or had politics thrust upon her by gifts that arrived with the speed of affection. They also argue how much of Maria's official quiet was a strategy rather than defeat. A queen banking dignity as interest, the corridor refuses to adjudicate. It is paid to be cool. You let your hand hover a breath above the saddle, not touching, only promising and feel the leather give back a ghost of warmth, as if rides keep their own echo. The iron buckles offer that harbor teaspoon on your tongue, honest and clean. For your second soft joke, you invent a domestic ministry called Office of Crossed Hallways, whose only task is to schedule who uses the garden at sunset so the roses can avoid unnecessary diplomacy. The roses approve by being beautiful on principle. A Liss-attested bedside story steps out of a chest with folded linen. A court poet swore he saw Alfonso present Leonore with a hunting glove still scented with resin and laurel after a long day, and that the glove slept under her pillow until the next hunt. Charming, courtly, uncertain. You set it on the maybe shelf beside the giraffe that may or may not have bowed in Palermo. Still, when a groom passes with tack that remembers trees, your ribs accept the notion that leather can carry thoughts. Another steady fact sits down with parchments that have creases. The victory at Rio Salado buys the crown breathing room. The order of the band tries to make knights behave with more calendar and less improvisation. Coin and court move. The frontier breathes with truces and alarms. The king lives long stretches on campaign, stopping long enough at cities for doorways like these to learn his shadow. The Alcazar's tiles imagine sea, even when the king is inland. This is the Castile that learns to put law into rooms and rooms into law. Historians still argue whether Alfonso's death at Gibraltar plague in the camp accelerated the disaster for Leonore, or simply removed the only umbrella that kept dry the people standing under it. After 1350, Queen Maria summons dignity and power equal to her title. Leonore is seized Seville, then Talavera, and in 1351 she is killed on Maria's orders, some say at Peter's counsel's urging, some argue over the exact place, a merciless end visible on ledgers written without sentiment. The record is not a rumor, it is ink with iron in it. You breathe and taste that iron, and feel your private tied staff drop a notch for the house that cannot be reconciled. For your third soft joke, you wonder if the Abbey hum Tim from earlier could be marketed to palaces drown out corridors with a soothing psalm in D minor, and then decide grief deserves quiet without gadgets. The bell in the chapel, obeying better instincts, does not ring. On the left, a clerk leaves Maria's room with a letter rolled and sealed. On the right, a nurse opens Leonore's door to settle a child without lighting the room. Courtiers pretend to notice nothing and everything simultaneously. The court's oldest exercise, you stand where the hallway makes its tea and let both breezes touch your face, the wax and the orange leaf, the linen and the saddle soap. Your signature knot sits behaved in the curtain. Your diploma in not touching holds, even for history. A page hustles by with a ledger grants, rents, villages stacked like careful bread. He passes a tiled fountain that talks to itself in water syllables steady, contained like the gate that hummed back in the river city, and like the tidy soot drum you loved for writing boring peace. Lovely, not a coastline. You pencil in your inner margin, this is not a map of saints or rogues. It's a floor plan of choices that did not fit in one room. Outside, a garden pretends it is midnight in April forever. Nightingales try a few notes and think better of competing with paperwork. A single rose drops a petal onto the stone with the sound a good quill makes at the end of a line. Somewhere in another century, Peter and Enrique begin measuring each other somewhere in this corridor. Shoes learn not to echo. You put 2 fingers lightly on the wall not to push, only to promise, and the stone returns its cool before forgetting you in the way you admire in furniture, gates, and history when it is done staring for the day. The hallway exhales. The left door writes duty on the air with wax and patience. The right door writes gravity with oranges and resin. Your breath keeps the fan's old meter, as if to remind both sides that circulation is the only plan that works in palaces and in lungs. You step away from the tea and choose neither door, because a storytelling for sleep is a walk, not an arrest. A watch bell on the wall outside the garden gives one courteous syllable and goes to bed. Attendance sufficient. Ahead lies a study of pine and cork bark where a pen will move with a king who writes verses slow and laws slower. Beyond that, timbered halls where dice clack and a clock forgets urgency. Beyond that, rooftops listening to drums that never quite sleep. Your knot sits, your shoulders lower by one measure. Cinnamon fails to confess and remains at large. You cross the patio with the soft tread of a proofreader turning a page, and the Alcazar, relieved to be a building again, settles around you like a cloak that remembers your shape. Pine and cork bark breathe in the study like 2 old friends comparing notes on weather, and the window learns moonlight by heart as it spills a pale square across the desk. Ink dries slow in the cool. The quill makes a cat foot hush a scratch. Lift. Breathe while a single bell over the palace gate offers one measured syllable attendance and goes to sleep with good manners. Your chest keeps the room's pace, and the resin in the air warms your tongue the way honest rope and tar do on a harbor night. You tie back a curtain with your signature knot, over, under, through, so the draft can look in, without making the parchment flap gossip, and the cord hums a small monk vowel your ribs answer as if this were the most natural language anyone ever learned. The desk smells of beeswax, iron gall ink, and orange peel. A page of neat Galician Portuguese verses leans against a sand shaker like a sailor against a bollard, staying put until the line settles. In the courtyard, a night watch turns on leather and metal, and the buckle breathes your harbor teaspoon of iron. The King Dinis o Lavrador, the farmer king, sits with his pen as if the pen were a falcon glove-like grip, careful wrist, eyes that understand patience. This is not a corridor. This is a room where words are the furniture. A steady fact sits upright with its shoes aligned. Denis of Portugal reigns from 1279 to 1325, and the kingdom under him learns to count and to plant. He fosters the Estudo Geral in 1290, the future University of Coimbra, a long table on which Portugal will spread its books. He encourages the use of Portuguese in royal documents, so that chancery breath begins to sound like the streets and fields. He orders the planting of the Pinhal de Leiria, a great coastal pine forest to fix dunes and feed shipyards. He reorganizes law with the ordenações that prefer clarity to drama. When the Templars are suppressed, he shelters their estates by founding the Order of Christ in 1319, which will one day lend crosses to sails. None of this needs gossip to be interesting. It smells of pine and paper and responsibility. For your first soft joke, you imagine a royal app on the desk called Verses and Forestry, where you can toggle between rhyme schemes and tree spacing. A pop-up reminds you not to mix them. Couplets should not be planted too close together. Pines should not be enjambed. 5 stars, surprisingly useful. The forester's request, stanza breaks in winter. A lute's faint arpeggio drifts from the hall and stays shy of the doorway. On the wall, a cork bark map pinches the coast in with tiny pegs. A strip of ribbon marks dunes slated for new routes. The king lifts his pen and looks past the page, as if the line he needs keeps itself just beyond the orange tree. Beside him sits a letter for his wife, Isabel of Aragon, the queen, who will be remembered as a peacemaker and saint, and a second packet of folded notes for a different corner of the household, where a long affection has settled like a traveling cloak, not one mistress only, but a string across years, the most consequential being Aldonza Rodriguez de Telja, whose son, Afonso Sanchez, will later walk the palace with the easy gravity of favored blood. Historians still argue whether Denis's promotion of Portuguese in Chancery was a proclamation in one moment or a long seep of practice under his name. They also argue whether the Leiria pine was first planted chiefly for ships or chiefly to scold the wind from moving sand, with shipbuilding as the clever second gain. The papers don't mind what scholars prefer as long as the ink dries flat and the trees keep their side of the bargain. The bell in the yard does not ring again. Once is respectable. A less attested story pads in, barefoot, with a grin it probably shouldn't bring to a study. People later told that Denis sometimes slipped out in disguise like a jogrol, a strolling player to test justice or to feel what verses felt like in a tavern, returning with a tune that blushed and a judge's name that did not. Charming, unprovable in detail, you place it on your maybe shelf between the king who loved thatching roofs and the emperor who allegedly smelled the hour on a rose. Still, When a draft rolls a whisper of cinnamon into the room from a kitchen you cannot see, you understand the temptation to go where smells keep company with songs. He writes another line, the nib scrapes, the iron tastes clear in the air. The poem is not lewd, it is attentive. The beloved's eyes are a kind of weather. The shore learns patience from her walking. The night makes a better case for the staying just because she sleeps nearby. The Galician Portuguese of the canção moves like a courtyard orderly, musical. Room for soft steps. Your diploma in not touching fragile things applies here to adjectives. You let the poem stay delicate without forcing it to carry freight it didn't agree to lift. A mainstream pebble on the floor Dennis fathers many children. Legitimate and otherwise Afonso, the heir who will be IV, and Afonso Sanchez, the favorite. Among others, and the palace grows a double gravity that tilts rooms differently depending on which door you use. Isabel mediates again and again between husband and son. In one famous piece, she is said to ride between armies to prevent battle, a queen turning a corridor into a threshold and making both sides borrow her calm. The study keeps that piece as a kind of memory. The ink dries without picking a faction. For your second soft joke, you invent a ministry labeled Office of Favoritism with guardrails, whose motto reads, "Love broadly, govern narrowly." The office hands out tasteful charts showing how to grant towns without lighting family dinners on fire. 5 stars, underfunded. The charts are used mostly as placemats in the nursery. Historians still argue whether Dennis intended to anchor Afonso Sanchez so firmly that succession would buckle, or whether favoritism was a domestic habit that became political only when armor got hungry. They also argue whether the poems signed El Rey Dom Dinis are personal or performative. Are we hearing the king's actual walk along a garden, or the language of a court where love is a practiced instrument? The verses, like good courtyards, allow both readings at once, sincere enough to please a body, formal enough to please a scribe. A less attested fireside tale noses in with saddle soap on its breath. A poet swore the king once paid a shepherd for a melody and then left his own ring under the man's bowl, saying payment and patronage should take turns, charming, tender, and uncheckable. You add it to your pantry of rumors that make rooms kinder even when they are only possible, not provable. Your jar of not tea in your bag on the floor approves of patience without comment. On a side table, a leather folder smells faintly of the sea. Inside a charter for the Order of Christ, the new monastic nightly house to which Templar properties have been quietly escorted. Assets tucking themselves into law the way sandals tuck themselves into rushes. Wax on the seal breathes iron and resin. The press leaves a small world in relief. You picture future caravels wearing little red crosses like polite declarations of purpose. The study has no need to know what centuries will do with this signature. The quill pauses. A chorus of crickets outside takes over the meter. You feel your own breath settle into the world's ch-ch. For your third soft joke, you propose a scent line just for this desk. Eau de verso notes of pine resin, cork dust, iron gall, and a hint of orange marmalade, courtesy of a queen who ensures breakfast arrives on time. Limited edition millimeter, of course. Smells like brass rulers and the patience of copyists who resist adding adjectives to inventories. A clerk brings in a roll tied with blue thread. He bows without a spilling shadow. On the outside reads a list of place names: Coimbra, Santarém, Évora, that sit on the tongue like good bread. The king initials the margin with a hand that does not make drama. You hover your palm a breath above the page, not touching, only promising, and you can almost feel the country push like a sapling against the word realm. Another steady fact leans from the doorway: Isabel will outlive Dennis, die in 1336 and be remembered as Santa Isabel. The pine forest will do its work for dunes and ships. The university will move, return, move again, and settle. The Order of Christ will carry its quiet treasury into voyages that redraw dinner tables and prayers. Dennis himself, poet, forester, husband to a saint, father to rivals, will pick up a reputation that refuses to fit under one hat. It will be tidy in documents and expansive in rumor. Both will smell of resin. Historians still argue whether calling him O Lavrador, the farmer, was a contemporary compliment on policy, a later nickname, or both. Whether the practical genius of his reign is better measured in acres, edicts, or songs. They also argue about how much credit the crown deserves for the forest's success versus monasteries and local habit. The pines, busy being trees, decline to participate. The bell over the gate tries no second word. The orange leaves in the courtyard turn their light undersides toward the moon and then reconsider. Your knot sit in the curtain like a small principal that does not need to raise its voice. Then it wipes his pen, sands the line, and sets the page aside with a hand gentler than most histories allow kings to use. You rest 2 fingers on a desk, not to push, only to promise, and the wood gives back a coolness it didn't need to keep, then forgets you the way furniture should. You step into the hallway that smells of pine, cork, and book glue. A page, sleepy but valiant, carries a lantern that keeps his face in its own kind weather. Somewhere farther north, a timbered hall will lift mead and a smoke to soften an evening for Wenceslas. Dice will clack, a clock will forget to hurry. Somewhere even farther, rooftops in Cairo will collect rumors like warm laundry, while a citadel listens without standing up. You carry with you the quiet syllable of the bell, the small vowel of the knot, the forest on the map pinned with ribbon, a poem that chooses light verbs over heavy ones, and a promise to keep walking. Says the courtyard, says your chest, and the ink on the drawing page declines to smudge because the room has learned patience and intends to share. Mead and smoke make a roof of their own under the rafters, and the timbered hall breathes like a beast that has learned good manners. Inhale past the rushes, exhale past the antlers. The hearth pops a polite ember. The dogs reposition themselves with professional sighs. Dice clack somewhere behind a pillar and then go still as if told a bedtime story. A clock on the wall forgets to hurry. Its tick takes the long way between moments, and one bell in the tower above the gate offers a single-syllable attendance and declines to get theatrical about it. Your chest keeps the room's meter H, and the air tastes of warm wood, malt, and a faint teaspoon of iron that honest cities put on the tongue after rain. You slide a drooping tapestry cord into your signature knot, over, under, through, so the draft won't gossip with the candle flames. And the cord hums a small monk vowel your ribs answer without making a scene. The hall is Prague's late-hour court, lined with fur and quiet argument. In the near glow, a man with a soft face and quick, shy hands sits with his cup and a game he may or may not be watching. Wenceslas Vaclav IV, King of Bohemia, lets warmth do the first part of speaking for him. He likes wood that has its own music and company that does not insist. A hound rests its chin on his boot. A falconer farther down the table tells a joke about a hawk with poor boundaries. The joke lands and is filed away forever, as jokes at courts must be. A steady fact sets its elbows on the board and refuses dramatics. Wenceslas IV, son of Charles IV, inherits Bohemia in 1378. He had been elected king of the Romans already in 1376, while his father lived. But the German princes remove him in 1400, declaring him negligent and replacing him with Rupert. He is seized by his own nobles in 1394, released, seized again by his brother Sigismund in 1402, and held a while in Vienna. He dies in 1419, soon after news of a riot in Prague. The first defenestration rattles the city, and his death leaves Bohemia to storms his reign did not quiet. This is the hallway version of his life, with plaques hung straight and no ash in the air. The room's version has different lighting. Wenceslas prefers night hunts, fish in still water, wood smoke that tells the truth, and hours that slouch in a chair. Historians still argue whether his reputation for idleness and drink, stoked by hostile chroniclers, accurately describes a king unsuited to the iron theater of imperial politics, or whether it exaggerates a temperament that simply wanted quieter tools. Forestry, dogs, a pen over decrees in Czech as well as Latin. They also argue how much his softness with certain favorites provoked magnates who were ready to be provoked, and how much was simply the shape of a court that missed his father's famous schedules. For your first soft joke, you picture the palace steward issuing a new app to the household tankard and tactics that locks the dice tray after midnight and sends a gentle note, consider sleeping, consider not arresting the king. 5 stars for intention, mixed adoption. The dogs approve of all policies that end in blankets. A page comes by with a trencher of dark bread. The crust crunches like frost underfoot. The clock coughs up a tick. Your diploma in not touching fragile things covers the carved chessmen. On the side table, the kings and queens have noses that wouldn't survive a sneeze, and your hand hovers above them, the way it hovered above fresco dolphins, and the tide staff's numbers, and the lamp that would not yield to drafts in Sace. You look up through the smoke and notice the painted saints near the beam ends, shining the way mosaics did in another city. Patient, not fancy tonight. A less attested tavern whisper slides into your ear, smelling faintly of cider. Later stories say Wenceslas liked to ditch the crown after curfew, dress down, and sit with craftsmen in warm rooms, testing ale and opinions. One anecdote, unlikely and charming, has him granting favors across a dice board and a bowl of carp soup, then leaving before dawn with the dog that chose him. You set it on your maybe shelf with the emperor who could smell the hour on a rose, and the Portuguese king who bought a shepherd's song, pleasant, possible at the edges, not the same as policy. The mainstream record is quieter, but has teeth. Wenceslas alienates powerful nobles by elevating certain men, favorites of pliant loyalty beyond what barons think the market will bear. He quarrels with the Prague archbishop in a long scuffle over jurisdiction. And in 1393, a town vicar named Jan of Pomok dies after royal officials interrogate him during a dispute related to a monastery appointment. Later tradition reshapes this into the martyrdom of St. John of Nepomuk, confessor to Queen Sophia, drowned for refusing to reveal confession. Historians still argue whether the confessional secret tale describes the same man at all, whether two Jans have been braided by time, and whether Wenceslas personally commanded the assault or presided over a machinery he could not or would not control. The river keeps its secrets. The hall keeps its smoke. The dog keeps its nap. For your second soft joke, you draft a flyer for your imaginary Abbey Hum TMM, now with tavern mode, drown out political bad ideas with a soothing psalm in D minor and the sound of a rational carpenter explaining budgets. The clock, grateful, forgets to tick for an entire breath. The dice behind the pillar attempt a tiny abstinence. You taste the faint iron of the town stoves, hinges, gourd spearheads, and that teaspoon puts you back in every harbor where bells behaved, back with gates that hummed, back with your knot that likes to keep curtains from meeting flames. Your palm rests lightly on the bench, not to push, only to promise, and the wood returns its heat before responsibly forgetting you. Lovely, not a coastline. You pencil on your inner margin again. We are not mapping vice. We are sitting in a room where character meets furniture and history takes its shoes off. The Hussite prelude arrives as air pressure. Not yet a storm. The preacher, Jan Hus, speaks reform in the Bethlehem chapel. Wenceslas protects him for a time because he likes domestic calm and dislikes a rival archbishop's reach. Bohemian nobles, German burghers, and university faculty sort themselves into careful rows. The Great Western Schism, the papacy doubled, then tripled, makes even steady men twitch at the wrists. Wenceslas prefers dogs to disputes, but disputes prefer him. Historians still argue whether his tolerance for Czech preaching in vernacular was principle, indifference, or a king's impulse to let the locals breathe and the Germans grumble. They also argue how much of Huss's safety came from royal protection versus the stubborn fact of a crowded, convinced city. A less attested menagerie story pads in with a yawn. A German visitor reported that the king kept apes in the garden and taught them tricks that embarrassed bishops. Charming, suspicious. Possibly a traveler mistaking dogs in coats for simians after a long evening. You file it beside panthers in Palermo and laugh softly at the thought of a bishop being out-argued by a capuchin in a felt hat. For your third soft joke, you propose a new office to sit alongside your Office of Hearts and Wardrobes, Office of Keys and Tankards, in charge of collecting keys from nobles at midnight and returning them with good grace in the morning. Their motto, no coups after curfew. The slogan tests wall with dogs and pages. Barons, less so. Dice clack again, twice. A hand hushes them. A piece of bread taps the table in rhythm and then decides that music can wait. The king lifts his cup. His face in the firelight looks like a page that would rather be a forest. He loved forests, boar, and stag, a bend of river where a float of candles once went and forgot to come back. He signs a paper, then another. In a hand, you can almost taste iron gall nib cutting a faint tang into the air. The clerk nods with stamina you've admired in Clerks from Castile to Cairo. Historians still argue whether Wenceslas's deposition as king of the Romans owes more to his affection for Prague over itinerant imperial tours, to neglect measured in unheld diets and unsigned reforms, or to princes who wanted a business-like bookkeeper and saw a man who loved night fishing. They also argue whether his death after the 1419 riot was a stroke triggered by shock or a failure of a body that had carried too much sweet and smoke for too many winters. The clock offers a long pause, as if agreeing that outcomes sometimes arrive by the most boring roads. You wander to a narrow window and open it a hand's width. The Vltava lifts a little syllable, HH, and sets it down. A bridge keeps its lamps as a small promises. A lone watchman's spear tip becomes a star and immediately stops being one. Cinnamon, yes, again threads through from a kitchen that refuses to go to bed while dough is rising. It is nobody's scandal, only a traveling spice with opinions. You smile into the night and forgive the century for liking warm pastries more than cold policy. Your signature knot earns another compliment for keeping a curtain out of a candle. Over, under, through. The cord hums. Your sternum answers. The clock concedes a tick with relief. You think of earlier rooms, the marble that gave back coolness in Byzantium, the orange trees that scented law in Palermo, the pine that made shipyards possible in Portugal, the corridor in England where one word late did a centuries of work. This hall adds its lesson. Sometimes a kingdom wants a drummer and gets a bassoon. The music continues, softer than the room requested. A page yawns an apology and sets a wooden cover over the dice bowl as if to tuck it in. The dogs decide to be rugs. A draft under the door remembers to be a river and then thinks better of it. You touch the bench with 2 fingers, not to push, only to promise, and the wood gives you a degree of warmth it didn't need to. The bell does not ring again. Once was enough. Attendance has been taken, even if nobody quite knew what class they were in. When you step back into the passage, the timbered wall greets you with the same cool you've been collecting on rails and desks and harbor posts. A candle tries to be taller than it is and fails with dignity. Inside the room you've left. A king who loved dogs and late nights sits with his cup and his weather and a set of problems that believed they needed a different man. You carry a draft of smoke with you, and the clock's refusal to hurry hangs in your sleeve like a permission slip. Down the stairs, cobbles think in Czech, German, and silence. Tomorrow, the citadel in another city will listen to drums that never quite sleep. Copper lamps will wink over alleys that taste of mint and leather. A sultan's rumor budget will buy more bells than any monastery needs. Your breath keeps the old metronome, the one that began with a fan on a desk and learned the notes of pipes, oarlocks, gates, and ropes. Lovely, not a coastline. You ride again where only you can see it. You close the door with the tenderness of a drawer that refuses to click, and the hall, grateful, becomes night. Brass lamps wink from balcony to balcony like friendly planets, and the alleys send up a night breath that tastes of cardamom, dust cooled by buckets, and the faint metallic teaspoon every honest city lays on your tongue after the sun has calmed down. Rooftops knit themselves into terraces, and laundry lines draw the constellation of everyday life right above your head. From the dark shoulder of the hill, the citadel listens a stone still, windows black, drums quiet for half a moment, as if the mountain itself is inhaling. Then the table khana answers the hour with a disciplined thunder boom, boom, measured as a clock, and your chest falls into its meter the way it learned from bells, fans, oarlocks, and gate hums. Attendance taken. You lean a forearm on a parapet not to push, only to promise, and the lime wash returns a small stored warmth before responsibly forgetting you. A breeze carries the copper breath of lamp bowls, the sweet fat smoke of flatbread on a griddle, and a sly ribbon of cinnamon that has somehow kept up with you from Paris to Palermo to Prague. Below, a water seller's clappers make a polite wooden music. Above, a bat practices punctuation against the moon. You slide a sagging laundry cord into your signature knot, over, under, through, so a wet tunic won't flap itself into the street. And the cord hums the quiet monk vowel your ribs answer, as if Cairo learned it from your rope, or your rope learned it from Cairo. A steady fact opens the gate without creaking. The citadel crowning this city began under Saladin in the 12th century, a military crown that the Mamluk sultans later turned into their address. On its terraces, the Nakara drums mark the day, the night, and the ruler's presence. Below, a city of crafts and books, scents and ink, goes on adding to itself. In the 14th century, Al-Nasir, Muhammad ibn Qalawun Sultan 3 times, and finally, for a long, confident stretch, builds and rebuilds up there his great mosque inside the citadel, stables, an aqueduct that persuades the Nile to climb the hill in arches. The city learns the schedule of his drums the way ears learn a neighbor's fan. Down a stair where walls hang on to daytime's heat, you pass a tea stall that has decided a night is a suggestion, not a command. Mint fusses in the glass, the sugar sticks a bit. The man at the brazier watches your knot in the laundry cord and nods as if good rope work is a dialect he respects. For your first soft joke, you imagine a rooftop app called Citadel Mode that lets you choose your soundscape quiet drums. Full ceremony? Please. It's a school night and it syncs automatically to the table khana. 5 stars, battery saving, compatible with cats. Historians still argue whether Al-Nasir Muhammad's reputation for lavish private life, many marriages, many children, an enormous household reflects reality in the proportion chroniclers give it, or whether moralizing pens inflated domestic detail because his politics made later writers itch. They also argue whether the long lists of his favorites and feasts should be read as criticism of excess or as proof that, after a century of turmoil, a sultan finally had the purse and peace to perform abundance. The drums say nothing back. They have already kept the appointment and have retired. A less attested alley rumor pads along beside you with its sandals in hand. Some swore that handsome water carriers were hired to pour rose water on the citadel, paving only on days when the moon was a certain size, that the Sultan liked to walk through the misted scent and listen for whispers inside the droplets. Charming, unprovable. You set it on your maybe shelf with the drowned plaza bell and the lamp in sais that never once agreed to go out. Still, when the tea stall tosses a cup of water down to settle dust, the little cloud rises and cools your cheek, and your ribs accept the practical miracle. You cross a roof where pigeons coo at their own cleverness, and a brazier keeps sesame warming in a pan. In the distance, a fountain does its accountancy with the aqueduct's water, and the sound reminds you of the tide staff's steady vertebrae back at the delta town, up a little, down a little, no drama unless asked. A clerk on a neighboring roof, barefoot, copies a line by lamp, and the nib of his pen puts the faint iron taste into the air that has followed you from a scriptoria to porticos. Another steady fact settles in with its sandals neatly paired. The Mamluks, military slaves raised in barracks and trained into a ruling class, built a state where elite households were armies in miniature. Favorites were not merely soft company, but hard policy. Officers with followings, men whose nearness to the sovereign was a problem set in steel. A sultan's private flair could tilt public payrolls. Al-Nasir was known for clever balances and for the quiet ruthlessness that reminded emirs who taught whose hawk to fly. The city below, tolerant of contradictions, kept buying sesame and copying books. For your second soft joke, you invent a citadel department called Office of Pageantry and Nap Scheduling, charged with ensuring that drums do not wake infants and that parades pass the bread lines only when there is extra bread. Their motto ceremony is a spice, not a meal. 5 stars, beloved by mothers, tolerated by trumpeters. A less attested moon rumor slips out of a stairwell. Cairo keeps older stories than any single sultan's, and one of them belongs to a Fatimid caliph from centuries before, the eccentric Al-Hakim bi-Amr Allah, who, people say, rode the night, issued decrees about shoes and shops and moonlit curfews, went missing one evening on Muqaddam's slopes, and became a story that never quite returns to bed. Chroniclers disagree wildly. Later pens made theater. Some loved him as a holy mystery, others as a cautionary tale. You set him gently beside your ornamented mashup of queens and towers in Paris, and let the older roof keep its older stars. Historians still argue whether the neighborhood tales about Al-Hakim's strangest decrees, bans on certain foods, dress, or night walks are fair a snapshot of policy, exaggerations of temporary measures, or inventions carved later to fit a moral. They also argue, closer to your hour, whether the lists of Al-Nasir's wives and concubines should be read as precise registers or as narrative flourish. Does the scribe's numbers say 30 because it counted, or because many prefers a round numeral your rooftop does not know? It only knows that laundry must dry and that mint, when bruised, makes the right kind of green in a cup. Under your elbows, the city makes its small repairs. A boy shakes a carpet. A woman folds a cool sheet that it smells of soap and the sky. A cat precisely edits a basket of figs. The citadel drums far off. Try a shorter phrase and a stop. You collect the note the way you have been collecting everything that rings once and then exercises boundaries. If your jar of not tea were here, its layers would settle without drama. Instead, your glass of tea throws steam into the breeze and behaves. Another steady fact walks up from the craftsman's quarter. Cairo's streets have always been committees of trades, coppersmiths chiming, bookbinders pressing, perfumers making alley weather, tanners facing the east wind because everyone else asked them to, and above it all, the citadel's silhouette, writes the grammar of power on the skyline. In al-Nasir's time, polo ponies ran in the horse square. Foreign embassies climbed the hill. Water climbed with them in channels and pipes. Drums kept the sovereign's heartbeat audible even for people who didn't care to listen. Historians still argue whether the late Mamluk cities gossip about sultan's scandal, sweetness. Salaries came primarily from chroniclers like al-Makraz, shaping moral lessons, or from the ordinary rooftop parliament passing along something someone's cousin heard from a baker's sister's husband in the palace kitchens. They also argue how far to trust calculations of household size and extravagance when ledgers for weaponry are precise and ledgers for charm have no columns. The lamps, being lamps, refuse to pronounce. For your third soft joke, you propose a fragrance stand beneath the aqueduct arch, eau de citadel brass, saddle soap, cooled dust, legal parchment, limited millimeter edition, smells like the iron rim of a drum, and the patience of men who count strokes. The water seller asks for a cut. The drummer does not care. The pigeon loft wants none of it and continues to be a separate government. The night ripens into that hour when even gossip yawns. You move along a parapet, 2 fingers tracing the air an inch from the lime wash. Your diploma in not touching still valid. Somewhere a call to prayer in a small mosque lifts like a hand, pauses, and falls back into the pocket of silence. The citadel unspools one last gentle tattoo and lies down. A less attested sweetness reaches you from a courtyard, a girl playing a rebab, the note thin and silver, quoting some court song that slid down the hill years ago and found a bed in neighborhood ears. The sound is the size of a thread, and stronger than one would expect from a thread. It ties your evening to others, to the lyre under the western beach, to the lute in a bohemian hall, to the hymn that hummed through the iron gate at flood, to the regular monk vowel your rope carries when it is pleased. Lovely, not a coastline, you write again, smiling into the tea, the rooftops settle. A cat makes a circle that deserves an award. A lamp is pinched with fingers and becomes a smell that says, done. You feel the city's heat drain by 1 degree your cheekbones can measure. Your signature knot holds the laundry line in dignified silence. Your ribs keep the hit. You have trained together across continents. You leave the parapet with the tenderness of a drawer that stops short of a click, and the wall forgets you like good furniture. Ahead lies a courtyard after monsoon, where sandstone sweats cool and lattice shadows crawl like patient vines. The drums will trade places with temple bells and pigeon whistles with kites. Rules will be written in Persian script and delivered by sandals that know when to pause. You walk toward the stair with the soft arrogance of someone who knows where the steps begin. The alley accepts your confidence and lends you its own. The drums do not see you off. They have done their work. The city turns over on its side, and your night carefully goes on. Rain has pressed the city flat and shiny, and the courtyards of sandstone breathe out a chill that sits kindly on your skin. Lattice shadows crawl like patient vines across the flagstones, jolly patterns teaching the night to move slowly, and the eaves drip with a rhythm you can fold your breathing into without effort. A parakeet mutters a green opinion from a soaked neem. A watch bell somewhere inside the gate gives one exact syllable attendants and goes quiet as if it knows the monsoon handles the rest. You lay a damp cord back along a carved post with your signature knot, over, under, through, so the line doesn't slap a lamp, and the rope hums that small monk vowel your ribs answer automatically. The knot, pleased to be useful in a climate with opinions, agrees to hold. Delhi after rain smells like wet red stone, jasmine, hot ghee cooling in a pan, and the faint metallic teaspoon you taste in honest cities after the weather lifts its shoulder. The courtyard is a square of good manners steps worn smooth by sandals, a channel for water to choose, a raised platform where someone's sandals wait to be resumed. You keep a diploma in not touching fragile things by not tracing the carved arches with your fingertips. You let your palm hover, not touching, only promising, and the stone gives you a film of cool without needing to memorize you. A steady fact sits down on the step beside you with dry feet in this medieval capital. Sultans build and rebuild, and rules are as much architecture as arches. Alauddin Khalji, ruling at the turn of the 14th century, rings the markets like a bell and expects them to keep time price ceilings for grain and cloth and horses, clerks and the spies to weigh honesty, a ban on hoarding so soldiers can eat without emptying kingdoms. He throws up the fort at Siri and tells Mongol raids to admire it from outside. Later, Mohammed bin Tughlaq turns the city's mind toward experiments, moving the capital to Dawlatabad, so administration might follow geography, striking token copper coins that ask trust to behave like silver. Even later, Firoz Shah Tughlaq calms the landscape with canals and schools, and lifts ancient pillars into new courtyards like bookmarks. Historians still argue whether Mohammed bin Tughlaq's grand capital move was visionary logistics or administrative misreading, or both in alternating breaths, and how much the copper currency failed because of forgery, distrust, or good intentions that met bad pockets. They also argue whether Alauddin's market discipline was purely military rationality or moral theater staged for barons and poets. The courtyard, refined by drainage, declines to adjudicate. It carries water toward a mouth and lets your breath settle into the same neat lane. A less attested palace whisper pads in. With wet sandals, storytellers say that on certain monsoon nights, a sultan ordered rose water sprinkled along colonnades so the air would forget dust faster, and walked the cool corridors listening to raindrops as if they were drums keeping human time. Charming? Unprovable. You put it on the shelf with drowned plaza bells and the lamp at Sais that never agreed to go out, and that ornamental O with the secret harbor. Still, when a servant in the far gallery tosses a pan of clean water down and the air actually sweetens for one breath, your ribs accept the rumor's manners and move on. From a side arch, the Qutb complex sleeps in a stone grammar, the old mosque. The minaret that makes the sky stand up straighter. Alauddin's Alai Darwaza door with its red stone learning to be lace. Your feet respect the geometry and stay on the dry ridges. For your first soft joke, you imagine a Sultanate app called Monsoon Mode that sends reminders, open sluices, close gossip, price lentils kindly. Please do not attempt any capital relocations until the road dries. 5 stars, updates arrive by pigeon. Cats ignore alerts. A file of clerks crosses the veranda with rolls under cloth ink that smells like iron and rain, letters that carry a steady heartbeat from office to market. A woman in the shade counts coins into a small bowl. A child holds his breath to hear the clink, the way you once held your breath to hear a bell ring once and then rest. On a ledge, a bowl of cardamom pods gives up one respectful ribbon of scent. And yes, there it is again, the faintest thread of a cinnamon traveling under the weather as if spice, not wind, wrote geography. Another steady fact puts its elbows on the parapet. Alauddin's household rules tightened the palace wine and a spectacle reduced, access controlled, the harem guarded with habits that sounded like architecture. Poets grumbled because poets grumbled, and chroniclers made lists long enough to look like a certainty. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, sharp, learned, awake past midnight, argued with jurists, invited philosophers, rode distances that made couriers proud, and also, according to harsher pens, punished like a storm. Firoz Shah, when the heavy weather passed, preferred repairs to inventions, where he found inscriptions. He escorted them to new courtyards and made them neighbors to fountains. Historians still argue whether Padmavati Padmavat's Queen of Chittor, whom later poems place at the heart of Alauddin's siege, is a historical person or a perfect allegory, whether that romance belongs in ledgers or in theater, whether memory and literature braided themselves on purpose, because rain always likes to tie knots in hair. The jolly shadows, too polite for verdicts, scatter themselves into latticed coins on the floor and go on striking a currency no one can forge. For your second soft joke, you propose an office to sit beside your office of hearts and wardrobes, office of reasonable experiments, whose only job is to ask, what if we try it small first? Their seal shows a copper coin winking at a scale. 5 stars, universally ignored until after the fact, beloved by accountants, tolerated by princes. Down in the bazaar quarter, post-monsoon lanes are already rehearsing their weekday voice cobbler tapping, ink seller shaking the sand, a man with a tray of sesame sweets testing the weather for forgiveness. A rumor moves like a low flood. The Sultan walks incognito at night to weigh loaves and overhear prices. Charming and repeated, whether he himself measures or sends eyes and ears is a distinction that matters to historians and not at all to Brett. Your jar of not tea, safely at the bottom of your bag, would approve of patience either way. It clarifies when left alone, and so do cities. You step along the platform where sandals are meant to pause. A small shrine alcove offers a place to say thank you without specifying to whom. A lamp gives its one syllable of light and keeps the rest for later. A guard in damp quilted cotton exchanges a glance with a clerk in damp linen, the language of cities that manage flood and market with the same shoulders. You rest 2 fingers on a column not to push, only to promise, and the stone returns a bead of cool before politely forgetting you. Another less attested story splashes in from the lane. A copper token from Muhammad bin Tughlaq's year is said to have saved a basket of mangoes, the grocer taking it as a charm long after it lost the power to buy anything. Charming, fruit-forward, uncheckable. You file it next to the shepherd's melody a king supposedly bought, and the giraffe that may or may not have bowed in Palermo. Still, when a boy runs past with a brass tray of mango peels curled like commas, you feel the city's punctuation soften. The rain slackens, pigeons quake water off their shoulders. A kite draws a dark sentence across a brightening strip of sky. For your third soft joke, you open your imaginary Abby Hum Tim and select Courtyard Edition, a low raga of water and sandals to drown out any arguments the accountants and poets might try to start before breakfast. 5 stars, monks approve, muezzins tolerate the competition because it is brief and tasteful. Historians still argue whether what people call perversion in royal lives is a moral costume thrown over disputes about money, rank, and the hours the court keeps, whether a ruler's affection or austerity becomes a stage where rivals appoint ushers and assign seats. They also argue, in this very city, whether the memory of a strict market is kinder than the memory of a strict household, and whether fountains are better biographies than edicts. The channel at your feet makes the debate look easy. Choose a slope, keep moving, avoid drama. You pass under a gateway where a carved inscription dries by degrees your cheekbones can measure. The letters look newly washed in patience. A chai seller offers a cup for your hand without making conversation, which is a kind of ceremony you recognize from Cairo's rooftop, Prague's timber hall, Palermo's cloister, and the Byzantine gallery where lamps taught cheekbones how to be humble. You lift the cup, the cardamom and the iron of the kettle find their way onto your tongue like two old friends. The cinnamon, truly insistent, now adds the smallest flourish and refuses to explain itself. Spices are not obliged to testify. A boy winds a string on a wet spool and looks at kites with hope, outrageous for weather like this. Your knot on the post holds in a way that would make kites proud over, under, through. The bell inside the gate does not ring. It has already counted you. Your breath keeps the courtyard's tempo, and the city settles the night's books with the sort of tidy, unsensational competence that you've been collecting since the first desk and its fan. Before the door, out to the lane, you write in the margin, only you can see lovely, not a coastline. Not because there is no sea here, but because the appetite for turning rumor into map deserves the same gentle resistance you have given elsewhere. A drop falls from a beam and approves by pretending to be punctuation. The watch in the gallery scrapes a sandal once and then models excellence in silence. You step into a street, blue with last rain, and the world is a laundry line strung between hours. In the west, other lamps will wake Fez by lantern and lute, leather and mint and ink, a Medersa breathing vowels into tile, a night where song chooses to be architecture for a while. You take Delhi's monsoon into your sleeve, its clean stone breath, its market arithmetic, its lines rubbed clear with weather, and your shoulders let go of a measure they didn't need to carry. The knot hums softly. The bell is done. Your chest says, the city, having counted you, consents to sleep again, and you move on with wet sandals and a pocket full of rooms that remembered how to be kind. Lanterns hang like small moons above blue tile, and you feel the night breathe mint into your face each time a kettle lit shivers on a brazier. Out strings climb a courtyard wall and slide along the carved plaster the way rain once slid through jolly screens, soft, obedient, in love with edges. Tanned leather from the tanneries carries its sharp sermon through the alley. Softened by rosewater, a shopkeeper flings as a kind of apology, and the air becomes the truce. Fez always makes a spice escorting work, music escorting law. A watch bell inside a fonduke answers the hour with one polite syllable attendance and rests, happy that the city already knows its lines. Your breath settles with the kettles while a student snaps his book shut. The soft thump measuring the end of a paragraph. You ease a frayed laundry rope away from a tile lip and give it your signature knot, over, under, through, so a wet jalaba won't flirt with a lamp. The cord hums that small monk vowel your ribs know by heart, and the tile gives you back a penny's worth of warmth before responsibly forgetting you, as good benches and railings have been forgetting you across the week. Ink from a calligrapher's reed smells like iron your traveling teaspoon, and an apprentice fans a page until the breath of the alley turns the letters from shine to matte. Mint esteem walks past your face and refuses to apologize for being a stereotype. Cinnamon, naturally, has sneaked into the teapot and has no plans to leave. A steady fact sits down beside the fountain with a folded map of the streets in its lap. Fez grows in layers. Fez el Bali, the old Medina. Fez el Jadid, the Marinid royal quarter built in 1276 with gates that remember processions and budgets. And between them, markets and mosques that use sound as architecture. Al-Qarawiyyin begins in 859 as a mosque endowed by Fatima al-Fihri. Learning settles there like birds that refuse migration, scholars making benches into syllabuses, courtyard into footnotes, and chains of transmission into staircases. In the 14th century, Marinid sultans crowned a study habit with jewel boxes, Al-Atarine Madrasa, Bu Inania with its fountain and clock tiles cool under your palm even now, wood carved until geometry forgets it was once a tree. Historians still argue whether Al-Qarawiyyin should be called the oldest university in the world, depending on whether your definition travels well across languages and centuries, or whether it is better to keep the word mosque college for its long, patient grammar and leave university to later European formats. They also argue whether Bu Inania's rare status as a madrasa with Friday mosque khutbah was primarily pious generosity or a sovereign's way to stamp legitimacy into tile. The lanterns decline to adjudicate. They have elected to flatter cheekbones and mind their oil. Less attested, but charming, is the alley rumor that one Marinid sultan timed certain audiences to the length of an Andalusi nuba. Petitioners had exactly one musical suite prelude through songs to make their case, after which the verdict rose with the cadence. Courtiers, the story adds, trained themselves to breathe with the rast mode for courage, uncheckable, melodic, filed on your maybe shelf beside drowned plaza bells and the private harbor in the printer's ornamental O. Still, when tonight's Aoud leans into a slow phrase and the magistrate nearby closes his docket at that very note, your ribs accept the rumor's manners and carry on. You drift under a cedar screen where light sifts itself into chessboard squares. Students pour out of a lesson, shoes back on, after courtyard etiquette quoting a grammar example that sneaks a compliment into syntax. A copper ladle taps a tea glass with a bright note. Somewhere a mule stampers thanklessly uphill. And the driver's murmur is exactly the tone you'd use with a drawer that doesn't like to click. For your first soft joke, you picture a fizz-only toggle on your imaginary chaperone app, lantern, curfew mode that dims alleys at midnight and sends everyone a polite line. Take your Aoud home, your footnotes miss you. 5 stars, cats opt out. A mainstream stone in a lane. Watch the Chuara tanneries tomorrow, and you see the empirical body of leather lime pits, pigeon droppings used for curing, dyes that stain forearms into maps of labor. Watch the Bu Inania clock gallery, and you meet water telling time with wooden bowls, a visible patience that feels like your soot drum back in that instrument room, writing boredom for safety. In the madrasa, a muwakit keeps prayer time with stars and shade. On the roof, a boy tests a kite against the river's night breeze. Fez keeps practical and beautiful under the same mulberry tree, and both make decent neighbors. Historians still argue whether Marinid splendor, the carved cedar, the Zelig mosaics like patient snowflakes, was primarily a statement to rivals or an inward promise to the city. The dynasty after the Almohads found its legitimacy in sponsoring jurists and students, or found a good excuse to do what Fez would have done anyway. They also argue about the balance between Sena shrines and schools in urban planning piety with a syllabus, or syllabi with a scent of pilgrimage. The fountain picks no side. It repeats itself the way good ordinance does. Private rooms above the street keep different weather. The palace quarter in Fes el Did holds households whose walls learn perfumes by repetition. Orange blossom amber, wool alongside ledgers that do not care what they smell like. Some rulers here liked company in great numbers and late hours. Some liked hawks and chess. Some collected poets the way a conscientious cook collects copper pots. Perverted is the word pamphlets prefer. Busy households with favorites is what records actually describe. Historians still argue whether certain Marinid sultans favored musicians and suite rooms to the point of neglect, or whether moralizing chroniclers salted the stew so that posterity would pucker. The Oud refuses to testify, it just keeps choosing the right notes. For your second soft joke, you set up a Fez fragrance stall next to the madrasa gate. New scent, tannery, and mint. Opens with decisive leather. Resolves into exam day tea. Limited millimeter edition. Smells like brass astrolabes and the patience of copyists waiting for ink to dry. 5 stars. The tanners claim royalties. The students pay in footnotes. A calligrapher trims his reed with a knife that clicks once the same satisfying syllable you've been collecting since that first bell on the landing. He writes a waqf deed, endowing a shop whose rent will keep a fountain honest, and the iron gall puts its harbor taste into the air again. You rest 2 fingers lightly on the cedar bench, not to push, only to promise, and the wood returns a small coolness before becoming furniture again. Lovely, not a coastline. You pencil inside your breath, because rumors about rulers are not maps. They are weather forecasts with a love of exclamation points. Less attested and entirely domestic is the tale that Al-Atarin's cats were bribed with sardines by students who wanted the mice to take their studying elsewhere. Charming, plausible, the ledger for sardine expenditures, tragically, is lost. The cat sitting 3 tiles away performs indifference with award-winning poise and pretends not to listen to the Oud. Another steady fact with clean sandals, Andalusi refugees, centuries of them, leak music and crafts into Fez until kitchens and courtyards hum in 2 shores at once. By the 14th century, The Nuba corpus lives comfortably here in orchestras with names like Rain, Morning, and Dusk. When a new sultan parades from the palace, the city knows which ensemble will carry the street into key. When a decree needs to be loved, it is announced beside a fountain and borrowed by a tune. Fez is very good at letting law borrow glamour without making either ridiculous. Historians still argue whether the Marinid's intellectual boomlet, madrasas, like bright beads along a thread, produced a deeper change in legal practice or chiefly beautified a status quo. Also, whether Bu Inania's water clock ever truly achieved bravura precision or mostly performed the idea of time in wood and tin, the students you just watched would say precision enough to find noon and beauty enough to keep noon from becoming a scold. For your third soft joke, you open your Abiham TM and select Madrasa edition, a low pearl of water, a page turning gently, and a teacher's voice that ends most sentences with 5 stars, beloved by exam proctors, ignored by lutes after dusk, lanterns blink, shutters learn night. The outline settles into a cadence that makes your shoulders let go by 1 notch on your private tide staff. A tea-boy brings another glass unasked, the mint, proving it knows its job, and the esteem writes a small calligraphy into the air that erases itself with perfect manners. You drink, the cardamom does its bright work. The cinnamon, still here, refuses to explain its itinerary. Spices are not obliged to file travel plans. You cross a tiny bridge over a runnel and glance down at the stars tumbled by water. The retreat writes itself narrow and then becomes a square where 2 booksellers stack volumes by lamplight Quran commentaries, saints' lives, arithmetic with stains from somebody's breakfast, a poem that made the trip from Palermo with a cousin accent. You hover your hand a breath above a leather cover, not touching, only promising, and feel the cool gathered there by a day of shade. The bell inside the fonduke does not ring again. Once, as in every city on this trip, is enough to count you and let you go on. Your knot holds the laundry where it belongs. The calligraphers read asleeps. The tanneries lower their voices. You shoulder the street's last warmth and file Fez where it belongs, between mint and iron, between song and ink, between rulers who liked rooms with company and a city that liked its fountains to be literate. You walk toward a door where a clerk will be weighing rumor against rule and sealing outcomes with wax. Goose quills will tap margins, and canon will make its tidy grammar felt. Your breath and the alley keep the same page. The lanterns approve by minding their pools of light, and Fez, pleased to have counted you, lets you leave as if you were a footnote walking home. Goose quills tap margins like rain that knows the roof, and wax seals cool in tiny lakes that remembered thumbs. You step into a chapter house where the air smells of vellum, beeswax, and the faint iron teaspoon that honest ink keeps in its pocket. A single bell from the cloister offers 1 neat syllable attendance and retires with the calm you've been collecting since that first landing with a fan. Your breath joins the room's metronome while a notary slides ribbon through a stack of folded writs, and you tie the loose queue with your signature knot over, under, through, so the packets won't season the candles with gossip. The cord hums its small monk vowel, and your ribs answer as if the knot invented the language and the chapter house merely hosts it. Here, pens are committees. One scribe copies a chronicle in a hand that behaves. Another tallies penances beside a list of fast days. A third strokes a rubric into life with red, so polite you can taste olive oil in its manners. The long table is a low tide of paper in one pool, letters from barons who swear everything. In another, a bishop's admonition that swears even more gracefully. On a shelf nearby, fat volumes stand like quiet jurors, Gratian's Decretum, 12th century, the book that taught Europe to braid contradictions into order, and a set of Gregory IX's decretals, from 1234 law parceled into tidy titles and chapters, so that marriages, kinship, and what to do when people behave like people can be reached with a finger instead of a sermon. Your diploma and not touching fragile things raises a small hand. You hover your palm above the bindings, not touching, only promising, and the leather leans you a breath of cool before becoming furniture again. A steady fact sits down right on the bench with clean shoes. The Fourth Lateran Council meets in 1215, and among its many decisions, no small gathering, it trims the forbidden degrees of kinship for marriage from 7 to 4, and tells parishes to publish bans so weddings stop hiding in hedges. Clandestine consent, two people speaking their vows to each other, still counts in many places, but the Church prefers witnesses, a priest, and the dignity of daylight. If you were John of England, this mattered, setting aside Isabella of Gloucester on consanguinity grounds, needed legal shoes to walk in. If you were a chronicler who didn't like John, the corridor wrote the rest. The chapter house knows this rhythm law lays the line. Rumor attempts embroidery. For your first soft joke, you imagine a new agency filing into the room with modest hats, Office of Rumor Reduction issuing parchment squares labeled privacy mode to cover juicy lines until two clerks and a cat have initialed them. 5 stars, tested by cats, clerks request more scores for late winter. The chronicler at the near desk works like a tide, pull a story from a letter, set it down, pull a date from a memory, set it in the margin. He has written about John's midnight corridors with a pen sharpened by monastic patience and dislike. He has written about Edward's favorites with vocabulary that floats between courtly and curdled. His Paris colleagues sent a neat digest of the Tour de Nesle scandal that fits, where stage plays later grew like moss. Historians still argue whether these monkish pens describe behavior or prescribe reputations, whether a scribe's moral horizon bends figures into silhouettes that will fit, and whether we should read a spice into the stew when the recipe already had enough salt. They also argue how much a chronicler depends on a single informant, one chamberlain with persuasive eyebrows, and how often that one voice becomes an entire choir in later retellings. Less attested, but adorable. A marginal note from a northern house whispers across the centuries, "We have run out of red. Send berries?" Charming, plausibly practical. You file it with your drowned plaza bell, your say lamp, and the ornamental O in the printer shop with its secret harbor. Still, when tonight's rubricator rinses his brush and the water tints the cup like a sunset in miniature, you feel the kindness of a world that remembers to color its headings. The canon law clerk across from you binds a packet of marriage cases with a patient thong. Names slide past. A knight requests dispensation in the 4th degree so he can marry a cousin whose fields neighbor his. A lady asks a judge to test whether her husband's no to conjugal life is the kind the law recognizes. A widow asks for a dowry to be returned without theatrical size. A seal impresses a lily. Wax breathes resin and iron. Your inner map with its 3 columns rumor, record, reason peeks from your sleeve. Here, record is a tidy clerk. Rumor knocks on the back door. Reason keeps minutes. Historians still argue whether the council's ban's policy changed actual practice quickly or if villages continued performing hedge weddings for a long century, with canonists trying to catch up. They also argue how intimately nobility obeyed kinship rules when borders and dowries pushed cousins toward each other, like chess pieces magnetized under the board. The chapter house does not argue. It files. For your second soft joke, you propose a confessional manual with a detachable bookmark called "Don't Put This in the Chronicle," to be gently placed over any a story that is both true and unhelpful at supper. 5 stars, beloved by confessors, resented by poets. A less attested anecdote from a penitent's manual sidles into the lamplight. One author warned priests against asking too many curious questions during confession, lest they teach sins to the ignorant, charming in its frankness, and a reminder that law sometimes knows when to close its own windows. You add it to your maybe shelf next to the shepherd's song a king supposedly bought and the glove under the pillow that smelled like laurel and resin. Another steady fact sits up a straighter. Excommunication and interdict are not just fireworks, they're tools. John of England's quarrel with Innocent III resulted in an interdict that largely stopped public church services for 6 years. Frederick II's excommunications wrapped law, politics, and rhetoric into a package that his enemies mailed to every pulpit. The clerks in this room copy bulls with the same care they copy lullabies for the office at night. Sanctions arrive on paper first, and then in bells that refuse to ring more than once. You remember how one bell, rung exactly once, counts you and closes the book. Historians still argue whether Frederick's enemies' lists of his appetites lavish, learned, and otherwise fairly describe the man or serve as a genre of political satire. Whether papal letters telling Europe to clutch its pearls created the version of Frederick we rehearse in Palermo's citrus air. They also argue whether certain queens' reputations, Isabella of France, Jean of Burgundy, were calcified by clerical prose that preferred morality plays. The quills scribble, and the quills refuse to apologize for existing. The archivist brings out a register, a long roll of parchment that unfurls like a mild snake, and looks pleased when your knot keeps it from migrating. Over, under, through. The cord purrs that monk vowel. Your jar of not tea, obedient in your bag, refuses to clarify any faster just because registries are present. It has a schedule, and you love it for that. For your third soft joke, you introduce an in-house service Abby Hum Tiem Clerk's Edition, a low, soothing drone to drown out the word scandal whenever it appears 3 times in a paragraph. 5 stars, a useful defense against adjectives, occasionally hums in the key of iron gall ink. The chronicler shifts in his chair and writes a line that is almost kind. The king retired late. You tasted that word late in the corridor, and let it pass. Here, you watch it become a datum that outlives shoes. Another line notes a dispensation granted propter honestatem matris, for the mother's honor, because law, for all its Latin, sometimes has decent instincts. On the next page, a bishop's court records reconcile a quarrel about a bed curtain, a borrowed perfume bottle, and an hour too long by anyone's clock. You feel the quiet relief of a world that allows small wrongs to be fixed without learning the spotlight's habits. A less attested office story breathes from the far end of the table. A clerk once scrawled "no more candles for arguments" after Compline in the margin of a register. Charming, practical, an early version of "do not disturb" for people who rely on daylight. You tuck it beside the abbey cat who notarized a scribe with a blink back in Byzantium, and the laundry ledger that marked Staine's explanations pending during John's long evenings. Your breath keeps the room's pace, shh, and the iron from the ink sets a tiny harbor taste on your tongue, the way harbors and forges and drum rims have seasoned your nights. You write inside your chest, where no one can see it lovely, not a coastline. These pages are not maps of sin, they are receipts of days. Your fingers hover a breath over the red paragraph sign, a pilcrow, that looks like a music note, and you resist petting it for the same reason you did not pet fresco dolphins, stone ripples, or the tide staff's wet numbers. Your diploma in not touching hums like a taut string. Pleased. Historians still argue whether the chroniclers we lean on for scandal, Matthew Paris for John, later Froissart for other courts, Al-Makriz for Cairo, wrote closer to theater or to ledger, and whether we should read them as weather reports with jokes. They also argue whether canon law stamped daily life deeply or floated above it like a ceiling of rules, protecting and scolding in equal parts. The best answer, the chapter house suggests, is that the ceiling leaked and everyone learned to put pails where rain was likeliest. The bell does not ring again, once was sufficient. The seals have set. The red line dries. A clerk ties the bundle you helped. The thong lays down like a well-taught rope. You lay 2 fingers on the long table, not to push, only to promise, and the grain gives you a small coolness before responsibly forgetting you. Your knot behaves. Your jar of knot tea minds its layers. Your feet find the stone sill and the breath of the cloister's garden. Outside, oranges blush in moonlight. A cat examines the world's docket and dismisses it, and a fountain repeats a sentence you've heard in a dozen languages enough for tonight. Beyond these walls, presses will wake, type will bite paper, reputations will set into ink with their rough edges intact. Tomorrow, you will walk through that room, beeswax and press thump, where afterlives are manufactured with tidy fonts. For now, quills asleep like tired birds. Law closes its eyelids over one decent eye, and the chapter house, having kept attendance, lets you go under the same blessed policy you learned from bells and gates everywhere present, counted, and permitted to rest. Beeswax and press ink share the same air, and the room smells like thunder that learned table manners. The press bed is a square of patient iron. The platen comes down with a whispering thump, the way a drawer closes without a click. You stand by the imposing stone where letters little soldiers with lead coats line up in a stick, shouldered tight, their faces catching lamplight like obedient cheekbones. A bell above the alley door gives one precise syllable, attendance, and retires, as if even bells know that printing needs concentration, not ceremony. Your breath keeps to the shop's meter while a boy dusts paper with pounce, and the grains hop like tiny saints avoiding ink. A compositor slides swords into place, and a stick becomes a sentence with gravity. He lifts the line to the galley as if moving a sleeping cat. You lay a loose cord aside with your signature knot, over, under, through, so it won't flirt with the frisket, and the cord hums its small monk vowel. Your ribs answer automatically. The foreman grunts approval without looking up. A sound you filed beside the oarlock thock, the keys dignified clonk, and the gate's low monk hum at flood. This room keeps its own liturgy set. Lock, ink, pull, breathe. A steady fact pulls a stool into the light and sits squarely. In the mid-15th century at Mainz, Johannes Gutenberg marries movable metal type to oil-based ink and a press adapted from wine or linen, and European pages begin to arrive in Flock's Bibles, grammars, calendars, indulgence forms faster than pens can manage. By 1476, William Caxton sets a press at Westminster. Suddenly, English has a machine, and chronicles that once crept in monkish hands learned to sprint. In Venice, Aldus Manutius shapes compact italics and octavos that slide into sleeves. In Nuremberg, a world history is printed with woodcut cities that look suspiciously tidy for a world that never sits still. Names acquire afterlives in fonts. Some become saints in type. Some become headlines that will not stop ringing. For your first soft joke, you imagine an in-shop app called Errata, which pings the compositor whenever a rumor tries to climb into a line. Are you quite sure the Queen was in 2 towers at once, and then offers a gentler synonym? 5 stars, reduces lawsuits, printers ignore it whenever the market likes spice. The format is locked. The tympan and frisket swing shut. The balls kiss ink to type faces with a noise like respectful rain, and the pull is smooth, a small exertion that feels like mercy. The sheet comes away printed, reversed no longer, voices turned outward. You put 2 fingers on the damp margin, not to push, only to promise, and the paper gives back a cool breath and then forgets you. As good paper does, the iron taste of the ink, the harbor teaspoon you've carried from city to city, lands on your tongue and tells you this page will dry into a future it cannot imagine. Historians still argue whether the first generations of print democratized knowledge or merely accelerated the best-funded voices, whether print stabilized spellings and reputations or multiplied versions until rumor had a job for life. They also argue whether pamphlets about certain medieval rulers, John, Edward, Queens of France, with towers hardened stories into national habits. The press-turning corridor whispers into furniture. The chase holds fast. The coins answer. Type does not vote. Type repeats. A less attested print shop legend pads across the floor with ink on its paws. One night a cat walked over a form, then sauntered across the proof, leaving crisp paw prints among the words, a notable example, charming, unprovable in this shop at least. You stack it on the maybe shelf beside the drowned plaza bell and the lamp in Saz that never quite permitted dark, and the ornamental O with the private harbor the pressman once declined to carve. Still, when a gray cat yawns atop the paper chest and considers owning the index of forms. Your ribs accept that cats edit history when no one is watching. The master corrector, eyeglasses. Twine at the temples leans in with a long needle and lifts a comma like a surgeon. His pencil, the one that once wrote morale, not topographic for a different shop, hovers above a line that tries very hard to make a map out of a moral again. He writes instead. In a hand you recognize lovely, not a coastline, and the compositor grins as if a wind has shifted. You remember the first time you heard that line in your head, in a book room with a fan, and you feel the map in your sleeve fold to its friendly crease. For your second soft joke, you propose a new office near the press called Department of Reasonable Headlines, where apprentices test titles by reading them to the shop cat. If the cat blinks slowly, the title is approved. If the cat bolts, the headline must lose 3 adjectives. 5 stars, cats remain incorruptible, sales modest but dignified. Aldine italics wink from a border in a book on a side table. A colophon from Cologne boasts a pressman's speed with a humility that probably made rivals roll their eyes. A stack of broadsides for the hostel outside promises true news about an old king's bad habits, woodcut courtiers, captions eager to be witty. Your diploma in not touching fragile things extends to satire. You hover and let the ink finish oxidizing. Beyond the door, the alley mutters in shod steps, and a cinnamon-stubborn traveler threads the air from a pastry seller who has found that people read better with sugar. Another steady fact slides a ledger toward you. Censorship is a real furniture piece that moves from corner to corner as centuries turn the index of prohibited books in Rome's rooms. Royal licenses in London, privileges printed like locks on title pages in Venice. Printers hang privileges like little shields and pray that law and appetite can be reconciled on paper. Some reputations are protected by statute. Others are protected only by how quickly a sheet sells out before someone objects. You taste iron again, the type metal. The ink, the discipline, and your private tied staff drops a notch in sympathy for all the pages that learn to hold their breath. Historians still argue whether Caxton's choices helped standardize, not just spelling, but memory did printing English histories tilt later readers toward certain kings being saints or sinners. They also argue whether the Nuremberg Chronicles portraits of cities taught Europe to see the world as a cabinet of reasonable shelves, or simply as a picture book that made everything look as tidy as woodcuts like to be. The frisket returns for another pull. Wood, leather, metal continue their duet. A less attested journeyman's tale buttons its coat and steps forward when the first italic books appeared. Rival printers allegedly posted beware of imitations, notices with curses on type thieves, and one snide broadside accused a competitor's italic of slouching. Charming, competitive, and exactly the sort of shop humor that deserves a stew and an early bedtime. You file it by the giraffe that may or may not have bowed in Palermo and the shepherd's song that might have purchased itself. For your third soft joke, you launch a scent line on the press shelf Eau de Press Room notes of lamp smoke, linseed, damp paper, a whisper of cinnamon from the alley, and a finishing iron gall tang. Limited millimeter edition, smells like brass composing sticks and the patience of proofreaders who believe in commas the way sailors believe in knots. 5 stars, the cat licenses the brand by blinking once. A forme for a chronicle is ready. It contains your old acquaintances in their new clothes, John retiring late, Edward with favorites, queens with towers, emperors with citrus, kings with poems. Type makes them sound decisive. Woodcuts make them look busy. Marginalia will try to rescue nuance one pencil at a time. You lean close, not touching, and hear, ridiculous or true, the faintest memory of the soot drum's boring, blessed line in the instrument room. Boredom is the press's secret holiness. Scandal is its rent. Historians still argue whether print repaired reputation or wrecked it, whether it created modern celebrity or merely provided cheaper gossip, whether a single woodcut of a king leaning toward a favorite fixed more opinions than 100 letters from a clerk. They also argue whether to call the shop a revolution or a large new broom. The cat yawns, the bell declines to ring, the alley keeps its balance between bread and rumor. The puller wipes the timpan, the apprentice lays fresh paper, the master whispers something that sounds like steady. You think of all your earlier rooms, the gate's monk vowel, the tea staff's vertebrae, the dolphins on dry waves, the mosaic saints refusing to be hurried, orange blossom deciding law could smell nice, laundry lines consenting to knots, drums counting a city without waking it, and you realize this shop is their cousin. It is patient when it can be, decisive when it must, and always willing to put a period where voices want to shout. A boy brings in a proof and holds it to the lamp. The ink glints, then dulls to readiness. The corrector's pencil, faithful as ever, changes one always too often, then scratches the note you loved in the other shop, moral, not topographic. Lovely, not a coastline. You write again inside your ribs, because legends about behavior are not maps, they are weather. The page will travel. You hope it travels with a cloud layer of decent readers who know how to pack an umbrella. The bell does not try a second word. Once, always enough. The cat kneads the paper chest into compliance and sleeps like a sure footnote. The foreman douses the lamp with a breath, and the room becomes a smell and promise. Linseed, iron, beeswax, cinnamon from the alley's last pastry. You rest 2 fingers on the press bid not to push, only to promise, and the iron gives you a sentence of cool before remembering it is iron. Outside the door, the night leans toward the harbor. Tar and salt trade opinions beneath a mild moon. A buoy rehearses its blink. Somewhere a rope hums your small monk vowel, because tomorrow's bundles will ride ships to sellers who will sing their headlines. Your jar of not tea in your bag minds its layers, refusing to clarify faster just because a revolution happened. Excellent boundaries. You shoulder the smell of ink the way sailors shoulder weather, and you walk toward the quay where one bell will ring exactly once. Rumors will float with dignity, and what will write a calmer line than any press ever could. The alley and your chest in perfect, publishable rhythm, and the city, satisfied with its proofs, lets you pass. Tar breathes under the mild moon like warm licorice, and the pier keeps a stored day in its grain but lends you only the comfortable part. A buoy blinks in the fairway with the patience of a librarian, and a bell near the harbor mouth gives one exact syllable attendance and goes back to minding the tide. Your hands settle on the rail not to push, only to promise, and the wood returns a teaspoon of warmth before responsibly forgetting you. Like every bench, desk, and balustrade that practiced good boundaries all week. Rope rubs against bollard. You lay a straight tail into your signature knot, over, under, through, and the line hums your small monk vowel so quietly, only your ribs answer. The water writes a long sentence in lowercase, no need for exclamation points. The night tastes of salt, tar, iron the harbor's honest teaspoon, and a ribbon of cinnamon that refuses to admit it stowed away from Fez's teapots and Cairo's rooftops and Palermo's cloisters, nets dry in soft curves that look like sleeping handwriting. A gull sets one foot down and decides to become a punctuation mark. Far out, a gate a shoulder hums like the one back at the river mouth where Flood learned manners between a stone and a schedule. A barge fender gives the gentle clunk you've been collecting since the first landing. Your bones file it with the oarlock thock, the door latch that preferred to be fabric, and the desk drawer that closed without a click. A steady fact ties up to the key with tidy lines. Ports turn rumors into cargo. In the late Middle Ages, merchants and pilgrims carried news as dutifully as pepper and alum letters copied and recopied in counting houses. Tidings swapped at fondues and the stews and church porches. By the 15th century, Italian avvisi, handwritten newsletters out of Venice and Genoa, sailed like regular weather reports. A little later, the age of print shipped broadsides and ballads, corantos and gazettes, so that a scandal about a king could make landfall in harbors faster than an offended bishop. Hansa skippers came ashore with Bremen prices and London whispers. Catalan factors sent home quick summaries with cargo and weather and who nodded to whom. The pier has always been a table for this sort of paperwork. For your first soft joke, you imagine a kiosk at the end of the pier labeled Office of Reasonable Headlines Shipping Department. Before rumors may leave, they must declare exclamation points, reduce adjectives by a third, and swear not to impersonate maps. 5 stars. The cat acting as clerk accepts fish instead of cash. Compliance uneven. A less attested dockside story clambers aboard and sits with its legs dangling. Sailors in one rain-blurred harbor swore a printer's proof. Once rode the wake of a cask all the way from a cutter to the pier and came up legible except for one missing comma, which, honestly, the teller would add, improved the sentence. Charming, unprovable. You file it beside the drowned plaza bells, the sigh lamp's manners, the ornamental O with its secret harbor, and the jars of not tea that clarify if you leave them alone. Still, when a sheet on a drying line snaps itself straight and smooth in the night breeze, you believe in legible landings more than you meant to. Historians still argue whether reputations for medieval rulers John's late corridors, Edward's favorites, queens and towers, emperors scented with citrus, farmer kings with verses, bohemian night watchers with dogs spread mostly through elite channels chronicles, chancery letters, sermons, or through ballads and tavern talk that climbed from deck to deck. They also argue how much print later hardened a soft rumor into furniture, how many of the stories we think we know were set in type in cities far from where the doors actually creaked. Your corrector's pencil from the press room leans over your shoulder and murmurs, "Lovely, not a coastline." And you nod because the harbor is a mood and a method, not a map of sin. A pilot boat ghosts by, its lantern drawing a patient seam. The coxswain raises 2 fingers to his brow and doesn't need to speak. On the quay, Bales of something that took a long time to grow sit under woven covers that smell of jute and distance. You practice your diploma in not touching fragile things by not peeking, and the bales thank you by continuing to be cargo instead of confetti. Somewhere a customs man stamps a paper and makes the little thump you like better than applause. Another steady fact. As plain as rope broadside ballads, cheap songs printed on single sheets, learn to love the sea. A hawker could step off a packet boat in Bristol, Rouen, or Lisbon and sing a king's scandal into coin before the tide set him back out again. Chapman carried pamphlets inland like lanterns, their glow uneven but persuasive. In older seasons, before presses, minstrels and preachers did similar work with memory for ink. Pilgrims walked home from shrines with prayers and palace gossip folded together. The world knew how to turn corridors into choruses long before headlines put them in italics. For your second soft joke, you propose a fragrance cart on the pier. Eau de Rumor opens with tar and orange peel, dries down to printer's ink and candle smoke. Limited millimeter edition smells like brass dividers and the patience of tide clerks. The harbor master declines to purchase. The cat blinks approval. A gull places a pre-order without paying. A less attested sailor's sweetness pads up with wet boots and no hat. The crews of a coastal run swore that when the wind fell away, a single deep note used to rise from offshore, as if a lost harbor rang its bell once to be counted, and that superstition required tossing a line into the still water and tying a knot in the air to say, over, under, through. We heard you. Charming, unprovable, professionally irresistible. You tie your knot anyway and let the rope hum its vowel because manners cost nothing and the sleep likes rituals. Historians still argue whether ordinary people in port cities cared about royal behavior the way pamphlets suggest, or whether they converted scandals into weather useful for choosing a tavern topic, unhelpful for buying fish. They also argue whether the Hansa carried more gossip south than the galleys carried north, which is the sort of thing historians enjoy wrestling because it lets them read notebooks in 2 languages and eat herring in research-justified quantities. The buoy's blink refuses to be dragged into this. It keeps time with the same mercy your soot drum kept back in that instrument room. Your jar of not tea in your bag behaves, layers settling as the night does. If you opened it now, the moon would write a quiet oval on the surface and forget it, exactly as a well-brought-up moon should. You rest 2 fingers on the rail, the wood gives you a brief coolness and then returns to being a rail. A watch on the far pier tries a yawn and turns it into a cough, which is good citizenship. A fisherman mends a net by touch and hums something like Abby Hum Tim Harbor Edition, a low working drone with the sound of water folding and rope agreeing. For your third soft joke, you elevate yourself to assistant harbor master, night shift, and invent a form titled Rumor Manifest. Columns, source boat, ballad, cousin, cargo opinion, adjective, duty paid, YN. At the bottom, your stamp approved for lullabies, denied for lawsuits, 5 stars, widely ignored by history, effective for your pulse. The press you left an hour ago has sent a stack of sheets to the ship chandler's counter. The top one shows a woodcut of a king leaning toward someone the page insists on calling favorite in letters that look too pleased. You hover, not touching, only promising until the ink dries its last shadow. Your pencil inside your head edits the caption from always to often, then to perhaps, said some. And the air seems to approve by cooling 1 degree your cheekbones can measure. A skiff kisses the fender. The clonk fits perfectly into your collection. A child on the gangplank is counting his stars as if someone asked for an inventory. His parent points out the big ones and lets the rest be background. You approve the method. In the far channel, a gate hums its monk vowel. A tide staff mounted to the quay quietly earns another vertebra. The soot drum of the sea writes boring peace. Lovely, not a coastline. You write again where only your breath can read it. People in rooms make stories. Water carries them. Paper hardens them. Bells count us. Your job, you remember from the fan and the first map, is to notice gently. Historians still argue whether we should keep using sharp modern labels for old appetites and old arrangements, or whether we should translate them into the grammar of their time and let their houses and laws explain themselves. They also argue whether your rope's little monk vowel is actually a C or more of a B flat. Scholars are thorough. The rope does not mind, it is pleased to be tuned. Out past the end of the pier, the moon lays a seam down the channel, and every place you've walked joins it for a moment. Stone ripples at Sais, dolphins on dry waves, the fog that rang a bell for one boat only, the columned room that refused to lose its light, the orange trees that fragranced a law code, the T-shaped hallway where roses and resin divided an evening, the timbered hall where a clock forgot to hurry, the rooftops that borrowed drums from a citadel, the courtyard that learned patience from rain, the madrasa that taught fountains to keep time, the chapter house that tied gossip with thongs, the press that set adjectives in their place. The seam holds, then loosens, the way good knots do after a job well done. You push no doors now, you take no notes, you give the rail one last touch, not to push, only to promise, and the wood forgets you without offense. A bell rings once, attendance sufficient. The harbor signs the end of the day in a hand you can read without squinting, and asleep, which has been practicing along every corridor, steps aboard. Let the pier grow softer as if someone has quietly unhooked it from the day and set it to float on a wide, slow breath. Feel the rope at your side relax by a finger's width, the knot holding without effort, the faint hum settling into that low, agreeable vowel that seems to come from your ribs and the water at the same time. Inhale as if you're looking at the moon's reflection easing toward you. Long and gentle. Exhale as if you're watching it drift away over the channel a little farther each time without asking you to follow. Let the sounds step back one by one. The buoy's careful blink becomes just a small pause in the corner of the night. The last footfall on the quay folds into the wood and loses its edges. The bell that rang once becomes the permission that follows it. The air cools by a degree you can feel on your cheeks, and then by another degree that you notice only because your shoulders let go without being asked. If a thought arrives like a boat nosing the fender, let it kiss and drift. Tied by the lightest line, you don't need to board, you don't need to wave, you don't need to make a list. Imagine the map you started with. that quiet sheet under the lamp and the fan folding itself along its friendly crease until it becomes only the weight of paper in your hand, then only the memory of a line, then simply the comfort of having put it away for the night. Imagine the jar of not tea on a bench beside you, layers settling of their own accord, surface smoothing without supervision. Its calm so ordinary it almost smiles. Imagine the press going dark, the last page drying itself, the pencil asleep with one soft word left in it often. Let your breath join the harbor's pace, the long, even in, and the long, even out, the kind that never asks you to prove anything, the kind that counts you exactly once and then trusts you to rest. The rail is cool under your fingertips. The night is wide and kind. The water is writing the ending in letters so large and slow that you can read them with your eyes closed. When you're ready, let the seam of moonlight narrow into a comfortable thread and slide into the warm pocket of your own quiet. The watch has been taken. The hour is kept. The tide will do its work without you. Sleep steps close, and you allow it.